All right, good evening, folks. I'd like to call to order the King George County School Board regular meeting. Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance, which will be led by Ms. Emma Lewis, followed by a moment of silence.
I pledge of allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, please be seated. And now Emma Lewis is going to share with us a few words about the Leadership Club.
This year in leadership, we added 9 new students, and we're really excited to be back in the building. We've already started on one of our first Harbor videos, which is going over the expectations for our school, including things like not wearing hats and hoods, walking on the right side of the hallway, and using appropriate language. This week, we had our first ever Musical Spirit Week, and we're planning a scavenger hunt for all the students next month. I'm really excited and honored to be in leadership another year, and thank you for having us.
Great, thank you, Emma. Thank you for being here. All right, next up, Deputy Marini is going to share with us some recognition for the Virginia Dare Association.
Thank you so much for having me here today. After receiving several nominations throughout the state of Virginia, the Virginia Dare Association is naming King George Sheriff Chris Giles as the Administrator of the Year. Nominations shared that Sheriff Giles used to be a Dare officer himself, and he understands the importance of keeping school resource officers and the Dare program alive in our schools. With the COVID restrictions, the Dare program in the county thrived in an online platform where he took part in a virtual Dare graduation video, congratulating the students for their hard work and dedication to making good choices. His continued support for the Dare program and the service to his community does not go unnoticed. And the school board, and I want to thank the school board for their continued support of the Dare program in our county.
Thank you. Certainly, not at all. All right, thank you. Congratulations. Thank you. Thank you all. All right, at this time, we will now open the floor for public comment. I'll ask that you please state your name, your address, and that you limit your comment to 3 minutes in order to afford everyone an opportunity to speak. Okay, and so first this evening, it looks like we have Thomas Crook.
Madam Chair, my name is Thomas Crook. Address is 1504 Woodstock Road. I'm a 22-year resident of King George and a retired naval officer with 43 years of government service. Thank you for allowing public comments at your meetings. As elected officials, you represent the people of this county. As we just stated in the Pledge of Allegiance, we have a republic form of government. I'm thankful for this country where the people have a say. Tonight, I humbly make one request to empower King George residents and to allow waivers to the recently mandated mask requirement for school staff and students. My daughter started teaching this year in King George. She had taught in private schools for 4 years. She signed a mask waiver, and within the week, that waiver was terminated. After 18 months, the Virginia Health Commissioner has issued an emergency mandate. Is this truly an emergency? Should not the legislative branch be involved? Should not the citizens have a voice? I ask that the school board be a voice to push back against this questionable mandate. Consider the risks as well as the benefits. Listen to the people, ask them their opinions. I say again, please empower the people to opt out of wearing masks in school. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Cook. Next, we have Greta Crook.
My address is 1504 Woodstock Road. My name is Greta Crook. My husband and I have been residents of King George for 22 years. Our daughter is a teacher in the King George Elementary School system. I am a registered nurse. Proverb says, "The righteous are bold as a lion, and by understanding and knowledge, the land endures." When media platforms shut down all dialogue, debate, reasoning, knowledge, and opposing views, we have lost our nation. Understanding and knowledge will be absent, and America, the land of the free and the home of the brave, will not endure. I'm here to speak against this school board's decision to withdraw the waiver of opting out of face masks for both teachers and children. I have read numerous articles on the ineffectiveness of masks. Dr. Martin Kulldorff at Harvard is one of the world's leaders in epidemiology. He states the SARS-CoV-2 Wuhan virus has been the biggest health fiasco in history. We did not implement basic public health measures to do what is necessary for the people. The collateral damage done from the lockdowns is more severe than the actual virus. Children have minuscule risk from getting this. Normal influenza infected more children than the virus. There have been 350 deaths from the virus, but we do not know if it was truly COVID. Annual influenza kills 200 to 1,000 children every year. In Sweden, they had no lockdowns, no masks, no social distancing, and no deaths in children. It's stunning that the basic principles of public health have not been used. He continues, public health has all health problems. You do not just focus on one. Focus protection for the most vulnerable rather than lockdowns is one example. A physician's assistant to address the Edinburgh, Indiana School District states, putting masks on children psychologically affects them, and you are going to implore more infections on them. There are literally studies that he can prove that on the CDC website, it shows that hand washing and masks do not prevent you from getting infections. Germs create immunity in the body. There is nothing stronger than our own immune system. The dirtiest part of the body is the mouth, and bacteria are found on the mask that the children have used all day. Dr. Dan Stark addresses the Mount Vernon School Board and states, the natural history of all respiratory viruses is that they circulate all year long, waiting for the immune system to get sick through the winter when vitamin D levels in the body are at the lowest, or when the immune system gets deranged, as has happened recently with these vaccines. No one can make these viruses go away. Why are we doing things that we do not do for the common cold, influenza, and other viruses? On behalf of the teachers and children, I ask you to reinstate the waiver for the mask mandate. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Crook. Lisa Perky.
Good evening. My name is Lisa Perky. My address is 9311 Fletcher's Chapel Road. I am a graduate of King George High School and I work on base. I moved back to King George in 2007 after serving the country in the Army because I believe this county to be an amazing place to raise my 3 children. Up until last March, the schools were doing a great job at providing our children education in an environment that was healthy and safe. Today, I come before you and express my sincere concern for the future of our children based on the lack of education that the teachers are able to provide children who are removed from the class due to COVID-related symptoms and or direct contact. My 4th grader went to the nurse last Thursday with a sore throat and a headache, no fever, both symptoms caused by postnasal drip due to allergies. Last time she was in the building was 2nd grade. That same trip would get her a mint, some ice cubes, and a little note to me saying, hey, watch your throat. This trip got her sent home for 10 days with no educational influence. I was sent on a scavenger hunt to find a COVID test, which came back negative. She doesn't have COVID. As I was walking out of the building with my daughter for her 10-day quarantine and she's confused as to why she can't go back to her class, I asked how she would be taught. I asked the nurse how she was going to be taught while she was out, and the answer floored me. It was my responsibility to reach out to her teachers for worksheets. Never mind the fact that she would miss instruction, bonding time with her class, and now she feels completely ostracized from her peers. I understand that I have the option to get her tested. I went to CVS, they had no available appointments. Her pediatrician couldn't see her till Monday for a 3-day test, and we went to NextCare and they weren't taking any more appointments. So my entire workday was spent searching for a way to get my child back into the building while no time was being spent ensuring she was receiving an education. I understand the protocol and I respect the caution, I truly do. However, I'm not sure why it's my responsibility as a working parent to clear her to come back to school while the school has no responsibility to educate her while she's out. I do not personally consider a packet of busy worksheets an adequate replacement for educational instruction. Another ironic observation is that this very meeting has a virtual option, while our educators within the classrooms are being told not to provide that same option to our children that are at home. We as a community are failing our children. In 10 years, when COVID is in the past, their deficit will still remain if we don't start closing that gap. I've actually made the decision to pull my child from King George County Schools and put her in Fredericksburg Academy. Our family is taking a huge hit because of that decision, but I can't have my child continue down this path. This is their 3rd academic year impacted by COVID.
Thank you, Ms. Perky. I'm sorry. Your 3 minutes are up. Mr. Vance, do we have any comment online? Okay, Kara Pellegrin.
Good evening. My name is Kara Pellegrin, and I live at 5487 Weems Drive. I had originally planned to be speaking to you in person this evening. However, my 2nd grader was exposed to COVID at school, so our family of 5 is quarantining. I spent the last 18 months doing everything by the book to keep her safe, and you couldn't keep her safe for 5 days. COVID is ramping up in our schools, and rather than being concerned about protecting our kids, it seems you're only concerned about liability. Thankfully, the governor has stepped in with the mask mandate, but it's still not enough. You sit 6 feet apart, yet my daughter sits desk to desk, shoulder to shoulder with her classmates.
Pellegrin, can you hear me? I'm sorry,
Hello?
we missed the beginning of your statement. If you would like to start over.
I'm sorry?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
I'm sorry, there was some, I think, technical difficulties getting you started. I think we missed the beginning of your comment. If you would like to start over.
Sure, thank you. Can
Certainly.
you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay. Good evening. My name is Kara Pellegrin, and I live at 5487 Weems Drive. I had originally planned to be speaking to you in person this evening. However, my 2nd grader was exposed to COVID at school, so our family of 5 is quarantining. I spent the last 18 months doing everything by the book to keep her safe, and you couldn't keep her safe for 5 days. COVID is ramping up in our schools, and rather than being concerned about protecting our kids, it seems everyone's only concerned about liability. Thankfully, the governor has stepped in with a mask mandate, but it's still not enough. You sit 6 feet apart, yet my daughter sits desk to desk, shoulder to shoulder with her classmates. How is your safety and well-being in jeopardy, but hers isn't? In previous meetings, Mr. Collins has referenced SB 1303 and how important it is to have an adequate in-person option. I absolutely believe this is essential for some King George students. However, you have not provided an adequate virtual option for those who want it. Virtual Virginia is not adequate. Registration closed July 15th. At that time, we were under the impression that school would be conducted as it was in the spring, distancing, mandatory mask, etc. It wasn't until August 2nd that we received notice mask would be optional, 18 days after Virtual Virginia registration had closed. Our only options were send our students when Delta is as contagious as chickenpox or homeschool. That is not adequate. As concerned parents, we emailed, we called. Beyond a response from Mrs. Gonzalez, our concerns fell on deaf ears. It was full speed ahead, right or wrong, safe or unsafe. The lack of communication is beyond frustrating. It feels like rather than being proactive and confident, every decision is reactive. The numbers will continue to rise. I believe the recent number is 175 students were quarantined last week. We see this in other school systems and we know where this is headed. Please don't bury your head in the sand and wait to make a plan. Our students sacrificed for their teachers and support staff last year when COVID was more dangerous for adults. Now that adults can be vaccinated and COVID is more contagious for children, it's a slap in the face that King George Schools is unwilling to take care of our kids. The division claims to, quote, teach children in an inclusive, caring, safe, and healthy learning environment and respond to their needs as partners with families in the community. We as a community need more from you. We need you to actually provide a safe and healthy learning environment for the students of King George. If our students have to get pulled out for a week every time they're exposed, their education will be continually interrupted. The schoolwork provided during quarantine took us 3 days to receive, and it wasn't equivalent to the 5 days of learning she's missed. Please reconsider opening up an in-house virtual option for those who want it or are quarantined.
Thank you, Ms. Pellegrin. All right, Mr. Vance, do we have any others online? That's it? Okay. All right, so moving on, do we have any changes to this evening's agenda?
No changes, Madam Chair.
Okay. All right, so next we will have a presentation on the 2022-2027 strategic plan.
Thank you, Madam. Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the board, and to our community. I'm very pleased to introduce to you Dr. David Gaston. Dr. Gaston is a former superintendent of a school division comparable in size to our own. He also has expertise in strategic planning, teaches graduate level coursework to students, and in introducing him, I also want to introduce the board to our need, and that is to revisit our division-wide strategic plan. That it's our current one certainly is deserving of some adjustments given the new paradigm we're currently in. And looking forward, I think it's important that we set ourselves up to not only have kind of a community conversation, as Dr. Gaston will, I'm sure, talk about a little bit here in a second, but to also leave that conversation with a direction and a plan that will guide our school division and our schools for the next several years. So I don't want to steal too much of his thunder. I appreciate him making the trip to be with us this evening, and he and I have talked quite a few times about this, and I thought it important that as a kickoff to this, he have a chance to show you kind of the system to be used and for our community to see the steps that we're about to take in developing this next iteration of our strategic plan. So with that, Dr. Gaston, welcome. We appreciate you being here.
Thank you, Dr. Benson, and Madam Chair, Madam Vice Chair, members of the School Board of King George County. Welcome, good evening. Thank you for having me this evening, and it's a pleasure to be here. As Dr. Benson pointed out, where there is no vision, the people perish. And so we are here tonight to try to introduce you to the process of strategic planning and to bring King George along into this process as a community-wide effort to really look at where the charted course for the next 5 years of the school division at least may lie. I come to you tonight as the president and CEO of my own consulting company. As Dr. Benson mentioned, I'm a retired, I use the word loosely, retired superintendent. It may be recovering superintendent, I'm not sure, it depends on the day. But I do have expertise in this area. I'm on faculty with Old Dominion. Planning courses at law courses and education foundation courses, which incorporate all of what I'm going to be sharing with you tonight. I've also developed a number of different strategic plans for a number of different divisions here in the state, as well as higher education. I just actually completed the Thomas Nelson Community College strategic plan in June. Actually, 2 strategic plans. So tonight, coming back to the roots of pre-K-12, I'm happy to share with you some of the ins and outs of where we'll be going and what we're looking at over the next 6 months or so. So again, thank you for having me this evening. I'm going to start really with what is a strategic plan. You have a comprehensive plan, strategic planning, but a couple of different names. But a strategic plan is very much a plan of a vision, mission, purpose. When we sit down and we have conversations, we're really trying to guide a clear vision and a clear purpose that's unified under this community banner. And it really is going to be the direction of we're going over there for the next 5 years, and this is how we're going to get there. It lays out all of the principles, the shared values of the community, so we have a process. It commits to a clear and compelling vision for all of us for at least 5 years to target. And every year has its own set of measures and targets that we're looking to accomplish as well. The objectives are measurable. The goals have metrics attached to them. There's an implementation plan to be developed as well, so that every year has a champion behind a specific goal that's basically working toward the end of that goal, and we have measurable evidence each year of what is actually happening, and how we adjust that every year becomes really the big question, which is a great opportunity for a division to really charter that course and trim the sails, if you will. The performance indicators and the timeliness and the assignments of that are all very important. You will have plan champions within your division who are in charge of specific strategies and goals, and they'll be overseeing that process, and we'll be tracking and supporting the progress and referencing it routinely each year. Division is going to be developing a dashboard, and we'll be reporting out the division metrics each year to see how the plan is progressing and to measure the improvements. A big part of this is determining the why. You've heard Simon Sinek, start with kind of determine what the strategic plan shapes for public schools and what it sets out to accomplish. Obviously, our mission is educate children. That's what we do well. But we have to really kind of look at the beliefs, the values, the way we do things, which essentially is the culture of what King George County is. And that culture in the learning community serves as the foundation or the underpinning for every plan that we develop. The strategic plan is the filter through which all the decisions that you as a board make and as the administration makes. So each of the goals and each of the objectives and strategies are attached to a specific area of outcome. And all of the decisions you make, whether it's policy, whether it's budget, or whether it's any type of other decision that has to be rendered at that granular level, has to be looked at through the lens or the filter of what the plan is determining. So it really becomes that roadmap or that filter through which all of your decisions are made. We stick to the plan and we work with the plan to achieve the greatness that we want to get at the end of that 5-year period. All of your priorities, all of your programs, all of your budgeting, all of your resources basically filter through those objectives and those strategies. So it provides you with a pretty clear roadmap of where you want to go. Outline here is a rough estimate of what the community process looks like. Each of those bubbles obviously takes us through a very important stage of this process. I subscribe to a process of community planning that really develops a community plan. It involves stakeholder participation at a very granular level through a number of different vehicles that we're going to be looking at tonight. The first stage obviously starts with you, with the leadership. August and September are kickoff months. We have individual interviews with each of you. So if we're going to be looking at the first phase of this, which is the next slide, the interviews with you all will be individual to try to determine a set of protocol questions to just kind of glean a little bit about your reflections on the school and your time on the school board and what you see as the important components of serving as a board member, as an elected official for leading. We've had conversations and continue to have conversations with the division superintendent and his leadership team, talking to the central leadership, school leadership teams, the principals, the assistant principals, and also right now I'm undergoing a comprehensive review of all of your key data measures. So I've basically had a chance to look through the technology plan, the former comprehensive plan, all of the school climate data, all the different pieces that come out of that, including the school quality reports, to try to get an idea of basically where are we. So phase one is really that establishment of where are we? Where are we currently? What's the current snapshot of everything here? We're going to talk about strengths. We're going to talk about challenges and threats, weaknesses and opportunities, and where you think those areas are. From all that data within the first month or so of this process, we move into a second phase, which is a focus group interview. This is a real heart of the process. Working right now with the administration, we are putting together key groups of formal and informal leaders within your community. They're going to be drawn from the teachers, the staff, the students, all of the business leaders, the community leaders, different individuals and stakeholders that are in the King George learning and geographic community. All of these groups will be working in small groups, about 10 to 15, where we take about a 45-minute to 1-hour period. And it's actually a lot of fun. We actually get very interactive with some of the areas and engaging with some of the areas where we'll ask them questions and reactive questions about different parts and different areas of the data and different parts of the community, what they feel are the strengths, what they feel are the things we might be able to improve, where they feel the good things are happening in King George. And those conversations are very tough because they're raw, they're honest. We want really good data.
We do this on site. All Delta variant, aside, we're going to hopefully get some time, and we will have some time scheduled on site here to work in person. The focus groups work so well when you have people together because, again, I can make it a very interactive process. Believe it or not, we usually bring a little food along.
Process and try to get that process
a little bit more underway as a conversation, as an interaction between folks. We're interested to hear what they want to say and what they want to tell us about what's happening here in King George County. Those meetings will be scheduled through the later part of September, early October. Usually to get 8 to 10 groups, it takes about a week or so to get that data, but that data is extremely important. Once we get all of the information from those groups recorded and coded, we develop themes. And those themes, or those major areas that rise to the top, will be very broad. It could be instructional support. It could be teacher retention. It could be facilities and resources. So we're going to see where those areas of very broad commonality are, where those touch points are. And then from there, we'll start to scaffold out into objectives and strategies that come from those conversations that we can glean people talking about frequently and mentioning in their areas. We also take a look at some of the areas that may be the outliers, because sometimes those may be areas we want to pay attention to. Strategically down the road, that may be something happening that we want to maybe look at more closely and see if that's something we'd like to see pursue among the King George community. From these focus groups, we also develop a very important group of people called the steering committee. I like to actually refer to it as the champion committee. But the steering committee consists of individuals from each of the focus groups that are represented to build kind of a super group. That group is really a stakeholder council that really engages in the granular work of what happens after the focus groups and the data is collected. We bring all of that information back to the steering committee, and in 1 or 2 broad sessions, we sit down and really begin to
mission, vision,
determining the core values and defining them. We want to make sure that operationally, what's something like resilience in King George, it might mean something very different from, let's say, Stafford County, or something in Florida, or something across the world. We want to make sure that it's a unique definition to this division and to this community, so that everybody has the same understanding of what that would mean as a goal for our children. We also provide you with monthly
every person each one to talk to you, update you, send you emails and messages through, obviously.
Dr. Benson, to kind of keep you apprised of what's happening and how the progress is, and to have you, be able to know which phases of the stage of this process we're actually in. Once that data is shared and once we begin to see the emerging themes, the steering committee works with us to develop the goals. And from there, we refine and we continue this process through most of the time through November, actually. It seems like a long period of process, but it's really not. It's a very focused and concentrated area. So with that, by November, we have the data, we have the drafts of mission, vision, the core beliefs and values, we have the goals and objectives determined, and then we sit down and we actually start to write. And we'll have a lot of writing, a lot of drafting. The goal is to have a final draft of this plan to you, to the county, pretty much by December, right before the holidays. In this process, what I enjoy doing is taking that draft, obviously putting it to you for editing, revisions, ideas, input, but we also put it out for a 2-week period to the community as well. So they have a chance to really kind of revisit and see where everything is at every stage of this process. And that final opportunity for the public to weigh in and look at all the different pieces and parts of the plan and to offer some ideas really solidifies areas, because hopefully everyone can see where they're reflected in that plan, where they have a stake in that piece that's really invested, and we want investment into that plan. So it's a very public process. We have social media platforms. We're going to be using the division website for announcements. The robocall system, obviously very effective. I used it a lot when I was a superintendent. We got a lot of communication out there, as well as social media platforms. We're going to have a separate community survey, because we know we can't touch everybody in each of those focus groups. They're a representation of your stakeholders. But we also make available a blanket community survey and a window, so that those that may not be able to participate or are participating in the focus groups have a chance to at least weigh in and be able to provide their feedback authentically on a survey instrument that's very similar to the questions in the areas that we work through in the focus groups. So we'll have a chance to really be able to touch as many people in the community as possible. As I mentioned in December, we put the internal stakeholder plan out for plan drafts to be reviewed by the community. The goal here is that by January, new year, with a relatively new board and reorganization coming in for the new year and a budget process that's going to be underway as well, we'll have a formal consideration for adoption by the board of a new strategic plan for 5 years for the school division. And that will really lay down the beginning of the foundations for a budgeting process. It's actually perfect timing with the new biennium, new governor coming in, all sorts of different things changing. You're going to have an opportunity to really be able to chart the course in terms of resources and allocations and filter everything through that lens as a new budget emerges from this administration. So it's good timing. What I also want to offer to you is we develop SMART goals. Obviously the acronym for specific, measurable, attainable, or achievable, relevant, and time bound. So these goals that we develop are all couched in data. They can be measured. They're going to have a metric attached to them. You have a lot of data in this division, a lot of great data. There are a lot of performance indicators. There are a lot of pieces there that are as simple as attendance rates to achievement rates and literacy to all sorts of different diagnostics that we can use. And so we're going to be tying in those metrics and creating a pool of standard metrics for this plan that can be measured annually. And strategically delivering these reports every year to the public to let them know how this is progressing and how you all are doing. Each year, obviously, if the data doesn't quite hit the mark or maybe see signs of progress that we'd like to see, you have the ability each year to adjust and trim the sails of the plan so that we can go back and take a look at what's targeting, what's processing, what do we need to adjust, what do we need to change. And then, as I mentioned, at the end of that period, pending adoption, we develop a separate implementation plan. So you know that year 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 each have specific things that we're going to be layering and scaffolding in and bringing on board. Some goals and objectives need to be achieved before others are achieved. And so we're going to take a look at how we need to basically scaffold that in on a Gantt chart and lay that out for a 5-year vision of what happens with King George County Public Schools. I know that's a lot of information on process, but hopefully there are some pieces and parts there that resonate. You all will be involved, obviously, and I'm looking forward to the opportunity to meet with you all individually. And I will be working, obviously, with Dr. Benson and Ms. Higgins to be able to set that experience up with us. And I'm looking forward to those conversations. They can be extremely engaging and really telling. And so I'll be interested to hear what everybody has to say. I'm a good listener. I spend a lot of time listening to a lot of people. I know Dr. Benson can attest as a superintendent, we spend a lot of time listening to a lot of different areas and parts. So I enjoy this part of this aspect. It's a community relation piece and it's very powerful. So again, I thank you for the opportunity tonight to be with you, and I'll be able to entertain any questions if you should have any.
All right, thank you, Dr. So Gaston or Gaston? I always like Gaston, like Beauty and the Beast.
I get that a lot. It's Gaston.
Gaston. All right. All right. Does anyone have any questions, comments for Dr. Gaston this evening?
Yes.
Mr. Collins?
So when you mentioned you mentioned vehicles to measurable goals. What vehicles? What type of vehicles are we speaking of?
Okay. For instance, if we're looking at, I'll just pull something out of thin air. If we have a parent engagement goal and we're trying to increase parent engagement, some of the metrics that we may be looking at are things that are very simple, like the percentage of membership in PTAs or PTOs or PTSOs. Do the buildings have PTSOs? Those are actually the first questions we ask. And then, how are the participation rates? That begs the question, what can we do to increase those rates? Going deeper, what's the parent participation in school events and school plays or school programming? Do we see a lot of that? And the buildings and the schools have ways of measuring and tracking that data. And so we take a look at those percentages. And this is just, again, a kind of a COD example, but that's kind of where we look at. So we'd be measuring that for each year of the plan. and taking a look at where those percentages are. And then we talk more importantly about the strategies behind them to be able to open up engagement, parent participation. I think, you know, this year with COVID, it's been an interesting time. I think it's reset the button on so many different things, but I know that that's one area that I hear a lot about in terms of, you know, getting parents back into schools. They've been really great in terms of supporting our children at home. Now we need to get them, you know, back into the bigger life of the school building, and it doesn't necessarily have to be maybe physically present, but also too, how many parents are we contacting through School Messenger? How many people are we reaching in terms of just emails and applications in those areas, and what platforms are we using, and are they successful? Those are questions we need to ask.
So you heard, well, I hear that the school board doesn't listen to the community. I hear it a lot. So I would hope that there's some type of vehicles, as you speak of, and that will make sure that the engagement with the school board and the community would become a different vehicle through this strategic plan. I'm very curious about your outside data, census, traffic count, so forth and so on. Is that what you use that?
We don't necessarily get into some of the more comprehensive areas of, let's say, county indicators like, you know, planning or comprehensive plans or developments and things like that. I know that growth is an area that is on everyone's mind in a lot of instances. What I say as a former superintendent and kind of as a current resident of a county is that the schools have an indirect effect on that growth, but not a direct effect on that growth, since the planning and the growth is really directed more by the county. But the thing you have to understand is that good schools make good counties and good localities, and they'll bring the people here.
Financially, the schools have over 50% of the county budget. So I'm very curious of how the strategic plan will use the financial data and to reach the goals of the school division, even when I'm not here in January when it's approved.
Absolutely.
But that you really can't do anything without the funds. So that I would think that would be a key component to make sure that the success happens. So let me ask you, so you speak of these groups, different groups. So how do they get picked?
Right now, we're working with the school leadership to determine as many cross sections of individuals as we can. So I'm in the process right now of looking through student groups, parent groups, teacher groups, staff groups, and really relying on you all as a community to kind of look at who the informal and formal leaders are in this community. Trying to figure out, you know, how we can bring them to the table, obviously, which measures and groups can we put together. It's not just a one and done. We usually run multiple groups of different parents, different students, because we know that this is a good cross section of people. We want to make this as participatory a process as we can. So I'm working with you all and your knowledge of the community and who those movers and shakers are and who those informal and understated leaders are that are out there, because they're important as well. And we don't want everybody, I think to your point, who is necessarily maybe in lockstep with everything that's happening with the schools. We want to know where that resistance may be or where that friction may be, because from that friction does come creativity and some options that we need to look at that maybe, as I said before, we haven't looked at. And I don't know what those are currently, but we're going to find out what those may be in terms of some of the things that maybe you're hearing as a school board member from different public comment.
So back to that same point, that's why I asked the question about the groups. So I think we need to, I don't want the strategic plan to be partisan. I want it to be inclusive of all the types of groups that are in King George.
Absolutely.
Which are, you know, there's a heavy religious presence in King George. There's heavy different presences in King George that.
Madam Chair, could we move on?
I'm not finished yet.
The rest of us also have comments to make, Mr. Collins.
Well, you had an opportunity. You said,
Okay,
"Who
Mr.
wants to speak?" And I
Collins.
said, "I want to speak."
Okay, Mr. Collins.
Get interrupted.
Okay, continue your thought.
So I think it's important in order to have the strategic plan actually mirror the community's interests.
Absolutely. Yeah, and that's our goal in setting these focus groups up, is to have as many representatives of those different demographics as possible, because you're right, there are many faith houses, many community leaders, different folks that have different perspectives that we want to include in that narrative.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Collins. Ms. Hawk?
Yes, and I appreciate your being here and taking the time to do this. I am wondering how you would do outreach to parents of diverse populations to try to seek out those informal leadership structures. Not all of our families have adequate internet connections or transportation to make it to various locations. And I'm wondering what you might have in mind for those.
A couple of different ideas, and coming from a pretty remote rural community myself, we faced the same problem. We had 209 square miles of very rural property and not a lot of access in certain areas. So a couple of things. We planned far enough, first of all, ahead out that we could contact and make contact with the various focus group participants, so they knew that this was going to be something that they would be involved with. What we did in particular was we provided transportation to them if we knew that there was something that was an impediment to their being there. And also too, the scheduling is really important. I'm working with these in person. So I'm in the county. We're going to be choosing locations that are central to, or hopefully more accessible to, people within King George. And so that will hopefully mitigate some of that. If we can get them to the site, that's another area that we'll try to help to overcome that barrier. Finally, too, we're going to be looking at the times and the days where we schedule this as well. Because not everything is going to take place at 9 a.m. on a Wednesday, because that's not feasible for working parents, for instance. So we may have to have some sessions in the evenings, where we can schedule it around activities, or we can schedule it perhaps with a meal where people can come in, they can eat, and then we can accommodate them and also take care of the business of the strategic plan.
Thank you.
All right, Ms. Pantier, do you have any questions or comments?
Yeah, I think that it's really important that the focus groups are very diversified. We have a very diversified community, and from serving on some of the committees, there's no diversification in them. And I find that very disturbing. And I would hope that if we're going to go through this, that we get everybody's input. And, I think that, I would personally like to see who's on the list. I think that, we have repeated staff members that are always in these groups that seem to have a very influential pull that I don't think is always the voice of the staff. So.
Excellent point. Thank you.
All right. Well, Dr. Gaston, I'm very excited about this initiative. I know it's something that a lot of folks have been hankering for some time, so I look forward to participating. So thank you for coming and giving us this introduction.
I appreciate your time tonight. Thank you very much.
All right, thank
you. With you.
Okay, next on our agenda, we have our consent agenda for the evening. So we have minutes from both special meetings on August 5th, the one at 6 p.m. and the one at 6:15 p.m. Do we have a motion? Anyone?
I'd like to make a motion that we approve the consent agenda, the minutes for August 5th, 2021, special meeting, 6 o'clock and the 6:15.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Chair votes aye. Motion carries. Next, we have our action items for this evening. We have a number of policy manual updates that have been reviewed at our earlier board meetings. Do we have a motion?
I move that we accept the policy manual updates as follows. BBA, school board powers and duties. BBBA, qualifications of school board members. BDDC, agenda preparation and dissemination. DIA, reporting per pupil cost. DJF, purchasing procedures. GBG, staff participation in political activities. GBL, personnel records. GCBC, staff benefits. IICB/IICC, community resource persons, school volunteers.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Chair votes aye. Motion carries. Moving on to our discussion items. First up this evening, we have our Potomac Elementary School modular units, and I believe we have Noah Bergman from Wiley Wilson with us here this evening.
Yes, thank you for having me. Oh, I think I lost the mic here. Got a tricky
You're too tall for that one.
thing going on, yeah.
Well, Mr. Bergman gets said, if I could just, recently, I want to make the board aware, recently I did present to the Planning Commission, the modular building Potomac was one of the projects that I presented to them for their consideration as a possible funding sources. We've also placed this project, an estimate for this project in the ESSER 3 planned expenditures should the CIP funding not be available. So I believe we do have funding sources available. We'll have to wait again for the Planning Commission and ultimately the Board of Supervisors to see which way they go there. But I appreciate greatly Noah being here this evening. I know he and his colleagues have completed an evaluation and then actually a second update to the evaluation, the original one, to help inform decisions moving forward with this property. So with that, thank you again, Noah, for being here.
Absolutely, my pleasure. We had submitted the recent assessment back in June, I believe. I don't know if you all had a chance to go over it. I can give a quick review of the project and what the general assessment was. We also have some numbers provided in a cost by cost, side-by-side ROM cost analysis. If you have specific questions to that, I'm also happy to answer them. And yeah, as a representative of Wiley Wilson here too, we have an ongoing relationship with you, and we're very pleased to help you out any way we can. Quick summary, I suppose. On May 7th, a colleague and I, as well as Dr. Benson and Potomac Elementary School staff, observed the current structure, the modular unit that was purchased, I believe, about 4 years ago, and is located outside the Potomac Elementary School. We were initially brought on to develop kind of schematic revisions, code compliant layout for a remodel of this building. And we have provided 2 renovation cost estimates that would provide that service with the existing components that could be salvaged. However, we also looked at new modular construction buildings and provided 2 estimates there. Since this was distributed, I have received a 3rd modular estimate, but I think for the intents and purposes of this conversation, we can stick to what was previously submitted, and Dr. Benson, I can forward that to you later this week. Yeah, it was our assessment that the existing building would require significant renovation. It has, in fact, deteriorated quite a bit, being relatively exposed to the elements with no skirt, without a proper exterior seal. And most of the sheathing on the floor, sides, and likely the roof are subject to mold and lack of structural integrity. So with that in mind, it was our assessment, looking at the side-by-side cost analysis of the current estimates. We took, full disclosure, we took 2 of these from our previous assessment back in 2019 and have modified those cost estimates to reflect not only inflation within the industry, but also the current economic kind of surge pricing, as it were. And I got those numbers from our from Alliance Cost Engineering. It's a licensed cost engineer that we work with quite a bit. So I feel confident in those. And these other 2 numbers for the modular units are direct quotes that we received in the last few weeks. So these numbers are up to date. Yes.
Okay,
Oh, yeah. So, yeah, it was our eventual assessment. I mean, looking at the numbers themselves, and I apologize, the numbers aren't brought up here, but essentially a new modular unit looks to be a more cost-effective solution. And not only that, it would likely be a turnkey process that would be streamlined and include warranties and other assurances that would mitigate risk moving forward.
okay, thank you.
Sure.
Mr. Bergman. Dr. Benson?
I don't want to jump ahead of board members, but no, I had a question about
Yes, sir.
the HVAC capacity. I know this was a discussion with the existing unit, and I just want to make sure that, you know, I think we procured this entire building from Mary Washington University really as a donation in quick order, and ran into some issues with the foundation, those types of things that we had to work through. But all that to say is that in your comparison, I know that we talked about HVAC capacity, or the airflow that needs to be at such a standard in order to certify the building as an educational building, not a business building. With the new quotes that you received, are those E-certified buildings, and can we assume that airflow and other educational standards are met with the buildings that were, I guess, quoted?
Sure. Within the estimate pricing for both of the modular units, it is my strong assumption, I didn't receive this in writing, but it is my strong assumption that these are certified for classroom use. Both of these companies have done work in the state with public school systems, and so they are familiar with those requirements. On their websites, they have specific education modules and buildings for that purpose. Yes, that is my assumption. Yeah.
And we'd have latitude with those organizations to design new construction in the way that we would need. And one of the conversations we had is the existing structure would be limited to the older students, I guess, because of the lavatory.
Yes.
Is that correct, or was it the other way around?
No, that is correct. If we were to utilize the existing structure, we would modify it in such a way that we would minimize the amount of new toilets required and new restroom space. And because of that, because students of the first grade or lower are required to have a classroom kind of en suite, that this existing layout and the proposals that we received 2 years ago for one additional restroom and augmentation of the existing restrooms more fit that particular program. Okay. Now, this isn't to say that we couldn't go back and modify, because if you were to choose a new building, perhaps a new modular building, that's not to say that you couldn't go back to the drawing board and request a different programmatic layout. The plans that were provided to us kind of schematically, or some of the ones that I saw on these websites for the modular companies, accommodate younger students. They have bathrooms en suite.
Okay.
So it would be, once you finally determined your desired program, I believe that each of these companies or whoever you work with could modify to that standard. Okay. Of course, these costs might change, especially in the renovation section, if that were the case.
But in those cases, they indicated that the existing foundation, or the, I don't know the term that you use it, but the not just the foundation, but the plumbing, the utilities, the connections that we've already invested in could be utilized with the new building itself.
That's correct. Yes. I don't mean to say at all that your initial efforts were for naught. It seems like the utilities on site are sufficient. It also seems like perhaps the structure, if you want to reutilize it, perhaps the existing air handling unit, the quite large unit that you have on site there, might be able to be reutilized. And I was told by one of the companies that they would be able to at least look at the existing pilings and see if they could modify units to fit that, and then gain additional savings. Each of these modular companies come up with a different solution. One might try to repurpose from a different place. One might try to create brand new. And of course, you have cost differences there. But yes, there you have a lot of latitude for.
So for the purpose of this analysis, would reusing or utilizing those affect the price, or is this price determined assuming that much of that could be reused?
Yes, this is intended to provide you with a complete pricing package for delivery, demolition of existing or removal of existing, and as well as a new building and then hookups to the existing utilities.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Benson. All right, Ms. Pansiero, do you have any questions or comments?
First, Dr. Benson, I have a question for you. So those Mary Washington trailers were donated, so they were a set size. Have you done an evaluation to actually see what the needs are for Potomac Elementary as far as what classes we need to add, how many classrooms we need to have, and so forth?
I'm trying to think of the evaluation. You're talking about like a growth evaluation or
Yes.
looking at cohort data? We've actually been to this point, we've been fairly steady with the exception of kindergarten at Potomac Elementary. We do, as we all know, the 6th grade now has moved to the middle school. That does create some space in our elementary schools. So we could look at it, we could try to project growth. Of course, a lot of that is contingent on moves perhaps the county makes as far as development and new families coming in. But I do think, and I think that's a good point, that we've got a foundation, or we've got some infrastructure out there that we could add to when the time arises. The only issue there is if we were to delay until we thought we needed the classroom space, the one funding source, the ESSER 3 source, it would need to be completed by the 24 to utilize that funding source. Otherwise, we'd be looking at a CIP project. The other, and I didn't.
So what is that other funding source? You said that one is a CIP project and the funding source is?
ESSER 3, the most recent round of CARES Act, money of CARES 3, if you want to call it that. I'll throw this out there. I don't know. I know one of the other projects I presented to the Planning Commission was the replacement for the preschool. We all know that is an urgent need for our school division, but things aren't built overnight. Perhaps, and some of my questions had that in my mind, perhaps this could create an opportunity to at least temporarily offer some improved facility for preschool while the county looks to find a funding source for a permanent replacement preschool. That's just an idea. I don't want everybody thinking that we're moving to a modular building for preschool necessarily. That's just me adding to the conversation and trying to address your question as far as growth. If not the K-12 population, perhaps then that's another population that could utilize a facility more or in a more timely fashion, knowing that in future days we might use it as swing space for Potomac Elementary itself.
So am I correct in that the CIP funding amount was $350,000 and the lowest one on this is $683,000? So that's a significant.
Yeah, that would need to be, you're correct. And I don't know, that would need to be corrected as far as the CIP, should they entertain the project. Typically those projects are presented, and then if they are advanced, then we start to refine, like the roof at King George Elementary School. We'll hire then roof consulting services with the county to give a more accurate, updated estimate for the actual Board of Supervisors to consider before approving. But you are correct, that number would need to be adjusted according to whichever path this board felt it was prudent to take.
Okay, so I'm sorry, what is your name again?
I'm sorry, my name is Noah Bergman.
Noah, that's right. Okay. I have a couple of questions for you. So I know that I read in here, and forgive me, I don't quite remember okay, so first let's start. There's two different kinds of modular buildings. One is the modular buildings, which I think we're all thinking about, which is similar to what is out there that we see in a lot of school programs. That's the type of modular building you're talking about that's going to be on piers, not the modular building where you build more of a permanent structure where it's a foundation and then you come in and you have the building in parts and you put it together. Is that correct?
That's correct. These two current estimates are from companies that provide the trailer type.
The trailer type.
Yeah. The third estimate that we got is considerably higher, to the 3 times-ish, but that would be a permanent structure.
So is that a stick built or is that still a modular building?
Well, so it would be prefabricated and brought on site.
Okay. All right. So then for
modular.
the new modular, so we have the renovation, so we have the new modular facilities estimate, the Will Scott, that is the trailer what version? So both of these are the trailer version, right?
SMM and Will Scott are the two trailer versions.
Right. So you don't actually have a modular proposal on here, modular pre-built.
Quote unquote modular, that's the one I received yesterday. And that is no, it's not a pre-built building. It's not one that's brought in per se. Yeah. It's not
Just more of a permanent structure.
Yeah. It's not like you'd see a house, you know, for example, like half of a house on a trailer coming down the road.
I'm very familiar with those. Pre-built structures. Okay. So would you guys think that you would be utilizing the existing foundation in these prices?
So these are not utilizing those. SMM said that there was a possibility that they may be able to utilize the existing foundations. And so I've included that number as an adult. They've estimated the existing foundations to be about $100,000 worth value. So if they were able to use that, that would drop their price further.
Okay. Well, I know that the existing foundation out there is not what we want to go with. I've inspected them personally myself, and I know that they were $99,999 to keep it under the $100,000. So that was a very good estimate on their part. But I don't believe that they will be able to be used. So I think it's important that we keep that in the foundation or in the cost estimate.
That was our assessment as well. Just to piggyback on that, especially the existing block foundation seems to be shored up with wood, you know, dimensional lumber, which I believe doesn't exactly, you know, align it. That this foundation was approved at one point, but it is our assessment that if you do choose to go along with the existing structure, that would have to be reassessed.
So the footings for that building are, as you know, with any modular building, it's contingent based on the design and the size of the building, which if we do something that's comparable, the footings might work. But in this case, they didn't put the footings in the correct place. So they put the piers and they aren't in the center of the footings. And in some places, they weren't even on the footings at all. So there is an issue. And that's why I want to make sure I went out with the building official and inspected them.
Absolutely.
So that's why I know that. Is there a possibility that since we are kind of far off from the CIP, that this could be done in two parts or two phases?
I didn't speak to any of the companies about phasing. And at this point, these are all for an 8,000 square foot building similar to what we have. Perhaps. Yeah, I apologize. I can't speak directly to that. But I do know that a lot of the limitations, your restrooms, for example, your access would all be required no matter what. Obviously your foundations, everything like that. I don't know if the interior build out, of course, if money is tight, you know, the interior build out 50,000 here or there might be beneficial, but yeah, I think you'd probably make much more efficient kind of progress if you did it all at once.
Okay, also, so there's another thing. You referenced the NFPA 101 in here as a code.
The fire code, yes.
So Virginia does not adopt the NFPA 101.
Okay.
So I'm just wondering why that's in there.
Oh, apologies. Yeah, there could have been a typo on my end.
Okay, so that is, okay, so you would be taking that. I would go by the IFC, which is, okay.
Yes.
All right, and then Dr. Benson, we had gotten a waiver that we did not have to do a full civil drawing for stormwater management issues or anything of that nature. Will that still hold true if we have to go in and redo everything? Redo everything? Because anything over 2,500 square feet requires a full civil drawing with stormwater management design.
Based on my experience last time, I wouldn't guess that the previous approval would apply. I think they would probably ask us to revisit or at least make sure that it's still applied with whatever the eventual size of the building is. So I'd be very hesitant to make that assumption and not repeat some of the difficulty we had with the current structure out there. You're kind of out of my expertise as far as permits and that kind of thing.
So I think we might want
to
verify that because that would be a huge expense.
Sure. Tell me again the name of the
A full civil drawing for stormwater management plan?
Okay. I assume to be submitted to the planning office here for approval.
Correct.
Okay.
And that is also could take several months to 2 years. Correct?
That's correct. Yeah, and that is not included in this right now. Thank you.
I believe that's all right now.
All right, Ms. Hawk,
No questions, thank you.
questions, Mr. Collins?
So just the 683 one and the 992 500, you said that included removal of the existing building?
Yes, sir.
Okay,
I added, it's just kind of a general $40,000, kind of a per square foot, general industry standard cost to that.
Okay,
And it
thank you.
would be, yeah, of course.
So now my question for discussion for the board, for Dr. Benson. So I've observed this project since the get-go, and there was many problems with this project from the contractor. Are we going to be able to recoup any of those monies from the contractor through litigation? Because it was not done correctly. That's where all the problems stem from.
I don't know, I'm happy to seek legal if you want advice on that as a board. I think it's been a number of years. I don't know. I guess I would need to seek legal as far as that question.
I think the statute of limitations is past that, and not only that, but wasn't that county money? County funded that foundation for us, didn't they?
No, it was not through a CIP. I mean, ultimately, yes. I mean, because the county funds the school division.
Yeah.
By that way. But I think, I think what we utilized was perhaps year-end funding to try to cover as many of the costs that were associated with, so we wouldn't have to go to the county and ask for additional funding, is what I recollect.
And I know that the current plan that you show here, they have an electrical service that's there that we could probably utilize along with the sewer that has been in place before the foundation went in. I'm assuming that would be coordinated with the new plan, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. It's currently it's only in one location, but I don't see accommodating restrooms in any part of the building really as becoming an issue. Yeah, and the electrical's in a good place.
You have a lot of exits and a lot of ramps, and
yeah,
it's just not going to fit.
No, we probably don't need.
No, you don't.
Additional 2 of those, and we'll probably work with that central corridor. But yeah, we were just kind of sticking with a general kind of efficiency plan, going off of what we had assumed we would be able to build from a previous sketch.
So for the members of the board, are you all interested in recouping the money because, I mean, you can still see the thing is not properly done. It's like he's mentioned, it's up on wood blocks, and Pansara talked about the foundation. Some of it's not even on the center of so there was a big delay in getting that contractor to start. When that contractor started, they didn't do the work correctly for whatever reason. The inspection department got in there, and it was delayed more because it wasn't up to code. And that's why you had the deterioration of that building. So you wouldn't have a $1,125,000. The building's rotted out because of the delays that have occurred. So I think we should at least attempt to recoup some of this money to go towards the 683,000.
So it sounded to me like Dr. Benson had offered to obtain a legal opinion on the matter. So maybe that's a good first place to start.
We didn't get a consensus from the board.
I think that'd be fine.
I think that'd be appropriate to do.
Okay.
Okay.
So
Any other?
quite often, sir, Mr. Bergman,
Yes, sir.
we have estimates 683 and 992, because that's the one I'm looking at. I'm not looking at the other ones. And Ms. Pantera spoke of the additional costs. So originally when we did the middle school addition, it was a low number, then it became a super number. So is that, I mean, what percentage should that be different than that number? The total cost with storm management, so stormwater management, all engineering costs, and so forth and so on.
We've included architectural engineering design in here, but we have not included all permits, fees, as was mentioned, stormwater management. But in terms of, from an architectural perspective, this is what you would need to move the current building, get the new building here, hook it up to existing facilities, utilities, and have an operable, co-compliant school building. Yeah, I apologize, I can't speak to more than that as to what those costs may be.
Total cost.
Yeah, could, like with the middle school program, you know, or the expansion, there was a contingency amount kind of set to the side. Now with this type of facility building, in your experience, is there a contingency that's placed to the side or recommended? And I'm speaking more particularly to the new than the former.
Yeah, the new meaning rather than the renovation, a new building.
I am, but I don't know about the board members.
Modular build, yeah.
Yeah, I think we can all agree that the newer building is definitely the way to go, not trying to renovate what is existing there due to the deterioration.
I certainly agree.
Yeah.
With my limited knowledge, I will yield to Ms. Pensiera, who has more knowledge than I do.
Sure. I think that would be prudent, but I would have to go back and talk to some of the other folks at the office in terms of the modular buildings that they've had built recently to see kind of what that delta is, because times have changed so much recently. I do have fair confidence in the numbers provided by these companies because they are so recent, that they are aware of the current, market conditions. Of course, there are kind of contingencies for delays and the like, especially with steel and wood prices. Steel sourcing are the two main issues right now. So that would likely be prudent to kind of cover yourselves.
So, Mr. Buckman, who would we, I'm sorry.
No, not at all. I'd certainly be happy to go back and.
So who would we, so Wiley Wilson's not the complete project? We had to find an engineer.
Well, we could be. Wiley Wilson is an architecture engineering company, and we're more than happy to help you out. We've included a base design fee here in the notes, but yes, it wouldn't, if it were with a modular company, we could certainly assist in kind of programmatic layout, consultation, that kind of thing. But these two companies would provide full turnkey design services for you, which would be, full disclosure, probably significant savings compared to what we would.
Right. So, but I'm still trying to grasp the additional cost.
Yes, sir.
Permitting fees, all that stuff. So
yeah. So the design fees would be included in these two estimates down here. The design fees for architectural engineering and MEP are included in these estimates.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, but we don't know what the additional fees will be.
Right. Yeah. Currently, we could certainly look into some contingency plans. I really tried to cover as much as I could. I've broken out the different sections, and if you don't see anything here that kind of comes to mind, please bring it to my attention, and I'm happy to adjust or revise to kind of give you guys a more full picture.
Could you revisit that with your office mates and then provide me any update that I could pass along to them as far as any unknown costs?
Certainly.
So do we have to pay the service authority the $20,000 hookup fee since that building's already hooked up?
I think it's already there, isn't it?
Yeah,
but the sewer line is there. I'm not.
Well, it's hooked. It's there, but they usually have a fee, the $20,000 fee for a hookup.
So they wouldn't have that unless they had to increase the service line. So if we have like a 2-inch or 1.5 inches now or 4-inch, I have no idea. But if we're not adding any.
I know, but yeah.
Any restrooms, or we're just adding 1 or 2, we probably won't have that impact.
Service authority is looking for money any way it can, so that's why I'm concerned that they won't charge us.
I'll check.
So I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
I guess to the board members here, should we be looking at local contractors for this type of thing?
No, this is specialized.
Is it?
Yeah.
And I think the county would then assist with the, the RFP process or that type of thing for procurement, given the amount that it undoubtedly would be. They would have to, we'd have to abide by their, the local ordinance as far as advertising and all that kind of thing.
When will the money be available for the, to be in the pocket of King George schools for this next round?
For the ESSER 3, the ESSER 3 funding, I believe, is available on a reimbursement, and so we've talked with the state about this project in particular and the timeline, and they've, we'd have to submit an application to them for approval, but they've indicated that they'd be very open to forwarding that application then on to the federal government for approval for the project. Again, the key there, the primary key is that the construction, everything would need to be completed by the grants, the end of the grant window, which is 2024.
So are we prepared to submit at this time?
Yes, I can submit, I mean, it's a form that I have to fill out, but I can fill it out and submit it to the state DOE.
I would do that until we have a definitive cost. Have some of those other things answered.
Well, I mean, you'll probably have some, at least 20% on top of the 683, and then you'll have your other costs that you speak of, I would say another $100,000. So you could easily submit the larger sum. If you have to give, it's better to have the larger sum and not need the larger sum and give some back if you had to.
So I've been saving my comments, but I think this is a good segue. So along the lines of what I was thinking from a planning perspective, right? So I would say before we made a decision for using the ESER funds, I think this would be a good opportunity to get an update from Dr. Benson on what the status of all the existing CARES and ESER fund pots are and what we have left to spend and what the plans are for the remaining funds, so we can make an informed decision about whether or not that's an avenue we want to go with, should we choose to pursue this project versus leaving it in the SIP cycle.
I wouldn't go with the CIP because that's not, I don't think you're going to have much chance with that funding there, just from my listening to all the meetings. But so, I mean, I thought we discussed this the last two rounds about in the next round, which is here, to do the job down there. Why we want to back off now? You only got till 24 to get the complete job, so you still have other things that need to be done. So why not go ahead and start the submittal?
So are you just making a suggestion that we start the submittal, get the process going to see if it's even an option? Is there a concern that there might not be an option? And at the meantime, while we're just looking at that option to see if it's a viable option, that they would be willing to see if we need any of the additional services that we've talked about? Is that what you're recommending? So not actually going ahead and saying, let's vote on the money and spend it. You're saying, let's go and
Let's
see if
ask
it's
the federal
available.
government for the money.
I
We
still
still can say no.
I think
We still have a long ways to go, so you have to know if you have the money available. You're not going to get it out of the CIP.
What is the process, Dr. Benson? I'm a little confused.
The federal,
Yes.
so from what I understand, we have, and we're happy to bring to you next meeting, a draft of proposed expenditures or uses for ESER 3 based on the input that we've received, both publicly and internally. From there, then, as I mentioned, that form, there is a form I need to complete. There may be data that you might actually be able to help me with, Noah, as far as square footage and that kind of just general information. But I submit that then to the state DOE, and Dr. Lane would need to endorse the project, which he has already indicated he's very open to helping local divisions with capital projects, provided they can be completed within the grant window. From there, then I assume that he gets federal approval for the process, and then we can proceed with, with the RFP or developing the RFP. I don't know how long each of those steps, but I don't anticipate they'd be weeks and weeks, that kind of thing.
So one question for Mr. Bergman. Is there a timeline associated with this? I don't know if I missed that in there, like from start to finish, if it was funded?
I think we would, and my apologies for backing up just a little bit. I think if it was funded, we would need to revisit the schematic program. We would need to see exactly what our needs were and try to be as specific as possible. If we were to go with something that is as broad as what we have now, I believe that some of these companies actually have units in mind that they would be able to move with relatively quickly. But no, I don't have a particular timetable laid out. I do think that it will depend on the company that you choose. As I said, there's that third company that comes and builds everything, kind of a bespoke solution, very expensive, but they might have a longer timeline, for example, but be able to tailor to very specific and individual needs, whereas SMM might have, a couple units that they want to reutilize or something. I think each company, it would depend on who you talk to, what that schedule would be. But luckily with modular units, they do tend to be quicker to erect than standard construction.
So when you were talking to these companies, do they have a backlog? Do you know? How is that sitting right now?
Yeah, they actually were, some of them were very busy, but they were relatively responsive. And so I do feel like they would be able to, if you guys, some of them asked, is this for next school season? And I was like, oh, if it were, how quickly could you turn around? They'd be like, well, it'd be a push, but they didn't say absolutely no. So something when I was talking to them a few months ago, something within a, let's say 3 to 6 month time frame might be feasible.
So, but can they guarantee it'll be done and out the door by 2024?
I can't personally guarantee that, but I would place that expectation if we told them early next year that that's what we wanted. I believe under a year is not unreasonable.
For delivery, not installation.
Delivery and installation. If we provided them with a schematic plan at the beginning of next year, I would be surprised.
At the beginning of next year, so that, right. So there would be a year. So we're looking at the beginning of 2024 before we even start construction, if we were to pretty much execute now, and that is without any type of, am I in the right year?
No.
No, 2023. I'm a year ahead of myself. Okay.
I think I am not them, and
that's
you
good.
Definitely have to talk to them. I don't want to put words in their mouths, but I am relatively confident that, this type of turnaround would be a lot quicker than a standard construction. I don't want to say, exactly how many months or whatever, but I do feel that these folks turn things around relatively quickly.
Mike, may I ask, is this construction dependent on additional supplies like the lumber and the steel and the copper, and which are very seriously delayed?
I would say less so, but it may be. We'd have to talk to them to see where exactly they are because it's so dynamic right now. I think the main thing that you'd have to worry about that I have included here with a kind of a significant cost multiplier, like a 5% multiplier, is your wood, your sheathing and that type of thing. Is the wood, like your plywood,
Yes.
But a lot of these are going to be, some of these are metal frame. And some of these folks might even have units that they want to either repurpose or reutilize. We'd have to talk. It would be per that specific supplier.
So we're missing a piece of the puzzle with
time frame. Yes, sir.
Well, time frame and additional costs.
I think that these estimates, of course, they are ROM cost estimates, so they could fluctuate. These are rough order of magnitude costs, so they could fluctuate. I think the primary purpose of presenting kind of the side-by-side analysis was that we could say, well, if cost of something increases, at least it allows us to know that that will happen across the board.
Mr. Bergman, I appreciate it, but I've been here 8 years and not one contractor or come in here and gave us a number and been that number at the end.
No,
that's why I'm drilling you.
No, I completely understand. Yeah, I guess in my experience, we're given a number and we just kind of have to go with it. And I apologize, I don't have as much experience on the client side as you do. And I know that these things can increase. So I will do the best I can to try to provide any kind of contingency or, padding as it were, with kind of a logical backing to it.
We don't use that word, Pat.
Okay, so Dr. Benson, so all else is, equal, say we have a funding source identified, that sort of thing. What would be if we decided to go forth with this option of a new modular structure, a new modular, what would be the next step for us? So earlier there was a discussion about getting some updated costs, I think that you were going to pass along to us.
Exactly. I think the questions I have written down, getting answers to those that you've asked tonight, and concurrently then submitting to the state to get approval there. I don't think approval means that's a commitment to spend. That simply means we have approval to pursue it should we feel it's a prudent thing to do. So getting that process started concurrent with the answers to the questions you've asked tonight, which will impact, the civil water management plan, for example, that could impact timeline. But getting answers to those as we apply. And then of course, next time bringing back kind of the bigger picture as far as ESSER 3 as a total, and seeing, if a third of it then is reserved for this project, then you'll see the other 2/3 and how that funding can be used. I think to me, that would be the next step, the next couple of weeks.
Okay. So to Mr. Bergman's point, right, that this was a rough order of magnitude estimate provided, right? So I still question the wisdom of going to the state and getting concurrence on wanting to use the ESSER 3 funds for that without having a final estimate that we would be expected to hold to.
I didn't understand what you're saying. I'm sorry.
I said, so if it seems to me like we're a step ahead of ourselves asking for approval to use the ESSER 3 funds before having a final estimate for the project we would be looking to undertake.
I would agree with that, but I do have to voice a little concern. I don't mean to throw you under the bus, Dr. Benson, but when I started with the board and looked at this, I said he said, oh, we're going to get in there next year. And I'm like, you're not going to get in there before my term is up. And we should have been here a couple of years ago, to be honest with you. So I'm excited to see you here. Thank you very much. But if we are going to act, we need to act quickly and make sure that we don't waste a day. So I think that we could probably get the information from the county as far as the stormwater management plan, if it's required or what else is required, and then, possibly get that answered. And then we could get some more information from Wiley Wilson within the next 2 weeks, and then be able to come up with some. And then Dr. Benson also come up and give us an outline of what the spending is and what other things he might be looking at, so that we have an idea of what we have left and what we can do, and then kind of work from there. But I do think that we need to work quickly.
Could we potentially go forward with the application with these numbers, for example, as placeholders, and indicate that they are placeholders and could change?
I would suggest that we go with higher numbers. Maybe go with the 992 one, which will give you some money for the other things if you decide to go with the other contractor. I would ask for more.
I understand your reasoning. I certainly do.
So as a first step, would it be excuse me, would it be prudent to have, I'm not trying to kick the can here, but in order to understand excuse me, the details surrounding the application for the ESSER 3 funds, to perhaps the first step be for Dr. Benson and staff, whoever, to find out if the amount submitted, find out the details for that application process and the requirements with regards to the amount, and if there's flexibility there, so that we understand how that process works. And then as soon as we understand that, and that I wouldn't expect to take too terribly long, then we could in good conscience submit a ROM saying, hey, it could change in the future.
So let's change some of the terminology on these. They're not trailers, they're educational cottages. But I would suggest either Mr. Bergman and/or Dr. Benson schedule a meeting with the planning and development so they can be a part from the beginning on this, so that we can cross some of those barriers that might have occurred. So, or you can have a liaison to them, or yourself, or those folks.
So the only other question I have is it kind of like an open-ended amount? I mean, are we limited?
No, and I didn't want to interrupt you, but that's a good question. And we do have flexibility. We can make an amendment to the ESSER 3 spending plan as time goes by. Obviously, the federal government has given us till 2024. That gives us the opportunity then to adjust as needs emerge, that we don't see today, but we may see down the road. But if let's say the cost of this escalates in a way, we could then adjust the spending plan for ESSER 3 overall to accommodate any increase. Now, we do not have the 3 times-ish for that type of construction that he described. I think right now we have about $1 million that is kind of earmarked or is set aside for this project in addition to the other expenditures. And we're happy to bring that full menu of proposed expenditures back to you next meeting.
That's a wonderful number, $1 million. I think that's where we're going to be.
Yeah, just to emphasize, and I apologize for the lack of transparency, but the Will Scott number was given to me as a range in between 925 and 980 or something like that. I just gave the average. And I think it would be important to also, if we were deciding to go forward with a modular unit, and again, I didn't take it that far. This was really just a modular versus renovation kind of preparation for me. But I think if that is the general consensus, we could probably get a better idea of the layout of the plans that or the product that they plan to submit. And you may be able to better assess the value of what you're getting. Because while they all have these components, not every modular company is the same. So that would need to be evaluated as well. And of course, there are many out there, but I believe that these are kind of giving you a decent average of what the cost could be for an 8,000 square foot building.
So thank you for coming. Sorry for some of the questions. You never know what's going to happen in front of this board.
Not at all. And this is an ongoing process again with us. And if you can think of anything else, please, have Dr. Benson contact me. I'm not like walking out the door or anything. Riley Wilson is with you guys for a while, so.
I was wondering about Dr. Gaston because he's going to do the 5-year strategic plan, and all these are in that. Hopefully that there would be some kind of communication or meeting or something to add him into that mix. Is that included?
That's a good question, I think, but certainly facilities or equipping the division will be one aspect of our strategic plan, for sure. So I don't know. I wouldn't expect Dr. Gaston to go with me to the planning office for the water hookup fee, but on a conceptual level and in the spirit of like community or facility utilization, growth, those types of things looking forward, it's certainly relevant.
Dr. Benson, if you can make that appointment for Friday, I'd be more than happy to go with you.
If I was you, I wouldn't let her go with you.
I don't, since the urgency, I'm not sure I can wait till Friday. Thank you.
Okay, so it sounds like in a nutshell, we would like to have Dr. Benson begin the application process, right? Find out what is involved. We'll get an update on the CARES and ESSER 3 funds at our next meeting, current balances, and then it sounds like we'll get some updated costs from Wiley Wilson along the way. Capture that accurately.
Yeah, hopefully we'll look further into county fees and development costs and that type of thing. We'll work with Dr. Benson on that.
Okay.
Thank you for your
Any further comment?
Of course.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Bergman.
So, Mr. Gaston, Dr. Gaston, could I
Collins,
wanted to ask him where he lives.
yes,
I'm currently in Williamsburg, James City County.
Thank you.
all right. Okay, so moving on. So next this evening, we have an update, reopening update for 2021-2022 school year. I would ask if there were any objections, would anyone mind if we took a quick 5-minute break? Okay, we'll return at 7:42. All right.
Oh, boy. You going back?
Ready? Ready if you are. All right. So we will now reconvene our meeting. So Dr. Benson, over to you for our reopening update.
Sure. Thank you for the opportunity. And I want to say thank you in advance. Ms. Mary Fisher, our supervisor for Family and Student Services, is here with us this evening, taking time to help bring greater understanding to some of the logistical things that we've been tackling quite a bit the last couple of weeks. But first, I want to, as a way of introducing this, John, can you go to the next slide for me? What was requested was just kind of a general, the last couple of weeks, we did, as I mentioned that very first night, but with great enthusiasm, we were happy to welcome back 4,374 students in person to our schools on August 9th. We have, just as a reminder, we have all of our students attending 5 days per week full-time, unlike last year at this time when, quite frankly, we were trying to decide, when we would begin the school, when was prudent. Some of the last minute preparations we needed to just get school underway in a virtual fashion. So I oftentimes think about that I keep things in perspective. As challenging as things may be during a pandemic today, I think we were more greatly challenged a year ago this time when we weren't able to get our students in person back into school. I want to give a special shout out because I know if you read papers, you know that nearby divisions have had some struggles with transportation, and we are not without our struggles. We are certainly not perfect, but I will tell you that our transportation staff, our drivers, we have asked some who have needed to do double runs, our administrators and staff at the schools who've been understanding about the absolute capacity we have transportation-wise and being patient with last-minute adjustments that we've had to make. Certainly our families and of course our students, we appreciate their cooperation in receiving information and communication about route changes so that we can maximize the capacity of our buses and get our kids to school. It is no easy task. The routing, the last minute adjustments. I know the night before the first day of school, we all kind of stayed awake because if you think about it, it was a brand new set of students to transport. It wasn't, we didn't have the typical data set we had from the end of the previous year to adjust slightly and move forward the next year. All of the staff there did a great job getting things routed, and they continue to make adjustments to make sure we get our kids to school and home on time for our families and for our schools. We are working very closely with the local VEDH. We meet weekly, along with nearby divisions who are all in the Rappahannock Health District. We value their feedback. They certainly have put in place a document that assists us. And I want to say that as we've talked about in previous meetings, the implementation of the new law requiring in-person instruction, balancing that with strategies and rules as far as quarantining, those types of things that are predicated by the VDH is certainly a balancing act and something that is different than last year's paradigm. One that we continue to adjust to because in the end, the goal is to keep our students in school, in person, full time, but to also do so in a way that is as safe as possible. And I thank everybody, our community. I know that oftentimes we disagree as far as some of the mitigating strategies. Sometimes we disagree as far as what VDH is putting out to us to implement. I understand that, and I respect those opinions. And I've talked with many parents, grandparents over the last several days, as has our staff. But we are doing our level best to operate a school division within the guidelines that we need to attend to. And again, I'll point, the tip of the spear is that we want as many kids, all of our kids, in school, in person, learning every day. And to do that with the current environment, we simply just have to be prudent in terms of shutting possible outbreaks and those types of things down before they interrupt learning for a more general audience of students. So with that, I'm trying to segue into Ms. Fisher's topic. Admittedly, her topic is a little more difficult than mine. But Mary has spent hours day and night, has led our school nurses, has led our response staff, has been the point in terms of communication between VDH and our staff, has stayed up late more nights than you can probably imagine, helping with phone calls to families that are not easy phone calls to make. We do not want to call families, obviously, and say that we're sorry there has been a contact, and to mitigate that contact, we need to quarantine several students, one of which is yours. We don't want to make those. Nobody wants to make those phone calls, but we understand they're necessary for the good of our community and our student body as a whole. So I'll take this opportunity to again thank Mary and all of the folks she's worked with for all the tireless hours they've put in since the beginning of the school year to keep us chugging down the track. And I'll turn it over to her. Her charge is a difficult one, but she is going to, as she does every day with great skill, she's going to try to highlight some of the most common situations we have encountered in terms of exposures, give you a general overview as far as quarantining. And I'll end with just a few notes, preliminary notes about how we're trying to continue instruction for those students who are on quarantine and how we plan to look to adjust our response in the near future in that respect. So with that, reintroduce Ms. Fisher, and thank you for being here tonight.
Thank you, Dr. Benson. So as Dr. Benson shared, I'm just going to go over some of the more common scenarios that we have experienced over the last couple of weeks and clarify some of the maybe misunderstandings that are out there and answer any questions that you may have related to those. To piggyback on Dr. Benson's shout out to transportation, I also want to say our nurses are rock stars. They are getting it done in those buildings all day and at home at night, contact tracing these families and communicating with our families regarding this. So I do want to mention that. So while none of this is new per se, there have been many changes over the course of the last year, but the general process and procedures are the same as they have been since we started last school year, whether that was partially in person for our K-2 students in January through March when everyone came back at least part-time. Obviously this year with over 4,000 students in our buildings now, it's every day, all day, and so a lot more I think questions are being asked, same questions. So that's what I want to do tonight, is take that opportunity to explain again what our process is and answer those questions for you. So the very first thing that starts everyone's day should be a daily screening. That's for students and staff. 3 questions. Do you have any symptoms? Have you been exposed to COVID-19 or have you tested positive? If you answer yes, you stay home and then proceed to the next. Obviously, if you answer no, then you come on into school. If we do receive any indication of a positive test, whether that's student or staff members, we begin contact tracing. I've listed out just the basic steps involved in contact tracing. Now, typically, contact tracing is done by the Virginia Department of Health. However, school systems have been tasked with this within the school setting, whereas other employers and other organizations, it is handled by VDH. So the first is that when we learn of a positive case, we calculate their window of exposure. That would be the 48 hours prior to their positive test or symptoms, and that determines where and when we need to contact trace that student. We pull seating charts, lunch charts, bus routes, extracurricular activity rosters, and review those for what students were in close contact being the initial 6 feet, within 6 feet of distancing. We might interview staff members, students, families, depending on the age level of the child or what additional information we might need. And then finally determine who meets that close contact definition. Once we know those students' names, they are supervised in a
contacted and picked up. And again, this is if we learn of a positive case and we have to find those exposures. Families are notified and they're provided with a calendar and all the return to school information that they need. So when a student is sent out after exposure, and again, most students are classroom staff as well, they are put on quarantine. In general, quarantines are for 14 days after an exposure. However, the CDC and VDH updated their definition for schools specifically towards the end of July to allow for a couple of exceptions. The first exception, and this actually doesn't apply just to schools, but the first exception is fully vaccinated individuals. If you are fully vaccinated, but determined to have been exposed to someone within 6 feet, then you are not required to quarantine. In the school setting, we verify their vaccination status, asking for their card. For students, we're able to look up their information on their behalf in the vaccination system, and then they continue in school as normal. The second exception is wearing masks. This was implemented at the end of July by CDC and then in turn by VDH, and that would be for any student wearing a mask in school. They are excluded from quarantine if they are exposed to a student that tests positive who is also wearing a mask while in school. So a couple of criteria have to be met there. You have to be wearing a mask, the other person has to be wearing a mask, and it must be in the school setting. It does not apply anywhere else, and it only applies to students. It does not apply to teachers or staff or other adults in the
How many students are quarantined?
Today, I can't tell you exactly today. I can tell you what the dashboard says as of last week. I could tell you if I had my database. Last week, there were a total of 134 students quarantined due to exposure. 7.
Thanks.
And sorry, Ms. Fisher, can you explain why the exceptions for quarantine don't apply to staff?
I can tell you that it doesn't because VDH and CDC don't allow it to apply to staff. It's their guidance. I don't know the reasoning behind it, but I can certainly.
I was curious. Okay, thank you. Nothing. Okay. Interesting.
So because masks are now required, obviously the mask exception to quarantining does affect our school division. However, there are times when masks are not worn by students in school. And this is where we are seeing the majority of our contact tracing taking place at this point. And that would be in the cafeteria or the classroom while students are eating. Obviously, you're removing your mask while you're eating meals. And so the mask exception is no longer in place. In addition, during PE, recess, and athletics, while you're participating in physical activity, you also remove your mask. And thus, if a positive case were to be identified during those time periods, those students could be close contact without the mask exception being in place. Okay. And again, families are contacted. They receive that return to school calendar that includes their quarantine requirements, which again starts at that 14 days of quarantine, as well as testing information for potential reduction of quarantine.
Being involved with the nurses, what is athletics the highest these numbers are coming from, or is it cafeteria or recess?
So prior to today, I would estimate that those were fairly similar because if you have about 10 students at your lunch table, you might have a group of 10 or 12 at PE that are grouped together. So those were probably fairly similar. I can certainly go back and try to get, more refined data on that. As of today, I do know that we had several athletic teams that did go into quarantine today. So the number has been bolstered. You don't have that yet because, our data only updates weekly. But because athletic teams are so large and it's pretty difficult to narrow those numbers down just because of the nature of athletics. Those tend to be larger.
So like if one person on a team, the whole team's out because they don't wear masks?
Potentially, yes.
Unless, and I don't mean to interrupt you, but unless, for instance, in the case of lunch, and I know our schools are very careful now to kind of have lunchtime seating charts, unless we can limit within that 6-foot circle, so to speak, to who exactly was in that circle, then of course we can exclude the other students. They don't qualify as close contacts. And so in response to your question, Mr. Collins, I would anticipate, given those exceptions, I would anticipate now that we're beyond 14 days of school, the number of students who qualify as a close contact in a classroom setting or any setting where the masks are worn is certainly going to diminish greatly. We still have and are applying strategies as far as distancing or having fewer classes at a time eat in a cafeteria. Those are the areas then that we can look more closely at in terms of strategies we can employ to reduce the number of students who may qualify as a close contact.
And if I could explain just a little bit, I don't want to go into too much detail because it's just so much information, but up until really Thursday or Friday of last week, we were still receiving positive cases that we were having to contact trace back to the prior week prior to masks being mandated. So, you know, if someone started not feeling well on, let's say Saturday, and they went to the doctor on Monday, they might not get their test results till Thursday and then contact us on Friday. Well, the 48-hour window would be 48 hours prior to them feeling ill on Saturday, which backs us up to Thursday morning. So Thursday masks were optional. And so we would have to contact trace every single classroom where that student was present on that day. And as Dr. Benson was sharing, we take their actual seating chart, we draw a 6-foot circle, and every student would be considered a close contact if somebody in the equation wasn't wearing a mask. I think we are past that window. There certainly could be an anomaly if we don't get notified of a positive test for a couple of days, but where at this point, the vast majority of contact tracing is in these unmasked locations, the cafeterias, the PE and recess and athletics, and truly every single day and every single case is a lesson learned where we get better at configuring our cafeterias and our spaces and our tables and utilizing the space to the extent possible.
So are we cohorting specifically the elementary school, because it's kind of hard to cohort in the middle school and the high school with kids going to different classes. But so if you have, say, a first grade class and you've got that 6-foot circle, everybody in that 6-foot circle or some parts of that, are they all sitting together as well at lunchtime?
That was one of the recommendations.
I did not see one that specifically in each of the buildings, how every class and every grade level is structured.
Don't you think that would be important to know? I mean, if we're gonna.
Yeah, I think I understand. So classroom, remember now, at this point, everybody is masked. So you could certainly have a seating chart cafeteria that situates the same students who are
nearest to each other in the classroom, make that a constant in the cafeteria. Is that that's the strategy you're talking about?
Yeah, so, I mean,
I guess I would
put a lot of faith in the mask. So if I don't know, I don't think any of this is logical, but that's my opinion, so.
So like the high school, it's a very social group. So they're sitting down and they move about and they move to different groups. So that could be, and they won't have a mask on because they're eating. So.
And then of course it says that the masks have to be worn properly.
So perhaps the question there is whether or not the seating charts also apply at, say, the high school lunches.
That'd be pretty hard, wouldn't it? But
I don't know, I'm saying
how
that
can you
would be
control
the
their
question.
How can you control the high school's movement?
So again, I don't know the day to day in every building. I do know that last week when I was at the high school for a couple of investigations that Dr. Boyd had numbered all of the tables. They have cameras in the cafeteria. Students, I believe at the time, were eating in the classrooms. But I don't want to speak out of turn. I'm not sure if that continued today, but certainly we could find that information out. All of these recommendations and suggestions have been provided to the administrators and the teachers to keep students potted or cohorted to the extent they can. But I don't want to speak on their behalf as to what extent this is happening in each grade level, because different schools and different grade levels departmentalize slightly differently from school to school. And I just don't want to speak to something that I'm not certain of.
But the idea is a good one that you mentioned, and that is that you keep, as long as we can go back and we can determine who was seated by who. That's important because then we're able to exclude from the close contact status students who we know for sure were not near the other students. So what you're talking about as far as in a classroom and then stay, those same students stay cohorted or nearest to each other in a cafeteria setting, the concept is exactly what schools are doing. That is, in the cafeteria setting, they are assigning, a seating chart. And as she mentioned with Dr. Boyd, they are able to go back, should a positive case come up, they are able to go back, say, okay, the student was seated here. We know that a 6-foot circle is going to include this person, this person, this person. Whereas if we didn't have a camera, we didn't have the ability to go back, we'd have to assume, and we run into the situation, we'd have to assume that the students in that class were close contacts. We can't assume you weren't and you were. We need to be able to definitively say who was and who wasn't, and that does reduce, and will continue to reduce the number of students who are quarantined as close contacts.
So just some of the other schools that I've looked at, they're larger than us and they're not quarantining nearly as many or having as many cases as us. So or not necessarily cases, but quarantining. The cases number is not significantly lower, it's actually higher, but I'm just not understanding why we're quarantining so many people.
I can't speak to that. I don't know about the other schools. We'd have to see what they're doing. You're talking about schools in other divisions, I see.
Yeah, other divisions. I know Stafford has one, and then of course Hopewell has been in the paper all over the place. So I looked at that one, and they're just not quarantining as many students as we do.
We do have a weekly meeting with our job alikes in the region every Tuesday, along with VDH. And so tomorrow, certainly that will be part of the conversation now that we are 2 weeks in, and I believe Stafford and Spotsy are both a week over since they began. Certainly that would be a conversation to have. And so the last bullet on this slide is in regards to the option to reduce quarantining. Back in December of last year, the CDC did allow for reducing quarantine period. Symptoms and testing options. Those were not, I don't want to say allowed, but those weren't allowed in the school setting. However, at the end of July, CDC and VDH did open that up to school divisions and allow for a reduction in quarantine in order to allow students to remain in school, return to school under those same reduced quarantine options. So we have adopted that option under their guidelines, which allows for a reduction of quarantine for students if they receive a negative test on starting on day 5 of their exposure. They can return on day 8. If they have no symptoms on day 10, but have not been evaluated, they are able to return on day 11, again, to reduce that 14-day quarantine. I'm not a medical professional, so I can't speak to why those days were selected, but I imagine it has something to do with the amount of time it usually takes to begin showing symptoms after an exposure.
So is that something that's new just recently, like today?
No, that was new in guidance at the end of July. However, it wasn't presented by VDH to school divisions until it was the end of our first week. So I believe it was Friday of our first week that we received that information.
So when we actually contact the quarantine, what information are we giving them?
So
They receive, obviously, the fact that they have been exposed and kind of why in regards to masking, that it was either in the cafeteria or PE recess, et cetera, because.
So you actually give the location of where they were exposed?
Well, just that it was a place where masks were not required. If those are the circumstances. Now, again, recently that's been all of our circumstances. But yes, we do try to give them, because they want to know, so we try to give them the information that we're able to without, breaking confidentiality or naming the student or staff member that tested positive. And then they're given an actual individual calendar with the last date of exposure, which is day 0, marked off, and then it counts every day up through day 15 when they can return. And then every day along the calendar lists, like on day 5, it says you can begin testing here. On day 8, it says you can return here if you tested negative on day 5 or after. On day 10, it says you can return here if you did not. And so every day is marked. And every student receives that calendar when they're in quarantine for any reason. They receive the calendar specific to their circumstance. And there are 7 or 8 in regards to what they require for testing or the time frame, but every family receives that.
So I think we got some emails where some families did not receive that. Do you guys remember some of those emails? Yeah, so not everybody's getting that, so you might want to check in that.
Okay, well, I mean, I certainly will remind our nurses. It is part of our procedure, and that is after the phone call to our families, they do receive a follow-up email. I personally send those to our staff members. And if there are families that didn't receive that, please send them my way so that I can provide it to them, because we have records of all of those.
Ms. Fisher, are there specifics provided to families regarding what type of test is acceptable for the results?
You can go to the next slide, please. So I actually included this slide because today specifically there were some questions, and unfortunately social media had a lot of questions and some misinformation from parents. Either test, antigen or molecular test, is accepted. Antigen is what is often referred to as rapid, and then one of the molecular tests is PCR, although any molecular test is accepted. You do not need both. You only need one. However,
if a rapid test and a PCR test are both taken at the same time, we must wait for the PCR results to be returned prior to bringing the student back. So if a testing facility or a doctor decides that they are going to perform both tests on that child or staff member, then we have to wait for that pending PCR test to be returned to us.
And why do they get the rapid test? What's the purpose of the rapid test?
A question I can answer. This is a physician facility testing location determination, but this information is provided to the families. It's on the we send home a 6-student notification when a child has symptoms that lists this information for the parent and for the doctor. It's also listed on every calendar that has some kind of testing component to it, that either or is acceptable for it, for the return or reduction. What is not accepted is at-home tests. VDH has stated actually just last week, because these are becoming more prevalent, that an at-home test that shows positive is very likely positive and should be considered positive in the school setting for quarantining. However, an at-home test that is negative cannot be relied on to be negative just due to the testing environment. So those aren't accepted as a negative for reducing that quarantine.
Can I revisit Ms. Panthera's question, because it's a very good one, and one that, again, we can't answer, but I do think if I were a patient going in, the only answer to your question that I think is if the medical professional is is content with just administering the rapid test and not administering a PCR, then it could be abuse in that situation. But the real question is, as a patient, I guess the questioning of whether the PCR test is needed. And I would agree with you. If the medical professional says we're going to need to do a PCR, then I would forego the rapid test, because the rapid test in and of itself isn't going to help me in terms of return to school. And I think that is a point of confusion, and one that patients out there then would need to ask their medical professional. But that's the only logical answer I can think of to your question, Ms. Pincer.
And then another question that we get a lot about the testing is in regards to the days listed on the calendar. Do I have to wait? You know, I'm notified today that I was exposed today. I want to take my child to get tested today. Can they then return based on this test? So yes, please go get tested if you feel that that's the best thing to do for your situation. Certainly talk to your healthcare provider. However, based on the calendars provided to us through VDH and CDC, a test on day 0, day 1, et cetera, would not negate the need for that test on day 5 or forward in order to reduce that quarantine.
There aren't any medical health facilities notifying the school that someone's been tested?
Yes, sir. So following a positive case, or more, any other questions on testing or, okay. So following a positive case in the schools, there are some legal requirements that we have as far as notification goes. And I know that this is a question that has come up a lot. First, Department of Labor requires that every employer notify every employee when a positive case is identified within their workplace. So every time a student or staff member tests positive in any particular building in the division, then every staff member in that building is notified via a general notification letter that the administrators have. For students and families, they are notified only if they are considered to be a close contact of a positive case. This is for a couple of reasons, but primarily in order to make sure families understand, I guess, the difference between a positive case that doesn't affect them somewhere else in the building versus they are a close contact. So to make sure it doesn't get watered down in those could, you know, potentially be everyday general notifications that there's a positive case, that this is specific to you and you have been identified as a close contact. There are also some situations, we had one earlier in this year in which contact tracing is difficult, and in the best interest of everyone, we feel it's necessary to provide a general notification, such as at open house. When a positive case was identified, there was simply no way to contact trace or determine who might have been close contacts, although we certainly tried and talked to the student. They were a new student, new teachers, and really had no idea who they were in contact with. So notifying everyone that might have participated in that there was a positive case in the building.
So student A is in elementary school and they have close contact. Family, and student C is at the high school. How does that work?
Okay, there are 3 siblings in the family. They're at different schools. One of them is in close contact with a positive case. That family is notified in regards to that student. We do, during the case investigation, take down the names of siblings or any family member in the household that is a student or staff member in King George County Schools, just for our own records in case it does become an outbreak situation. But they do not need to quarantine. They're
you know, 2 steps away. They're an exposure of an exposure, so there's nothing required.
So when you're at the cafeteria and you take off your mask to eat, 5 minutes, put your mask back on, then somebody that's called close contact, you know, 6 kids at the table, and they all get notified and they get quarantined. But the family members who go home have 3 different schools and they play outside and everything with their kids, they don't have to get quarantined.
correct, because they've not been exposed to a positive case at that point.
And I would add, that's not unique from a quarantine standpoint. Other employers handle it the same way. So that's.
Because you're talking about, you're saying you are, let me make sure I'm understanding. The student is identified as a close contact, not as, they have not tested positive themselves, correct? Right. So the other children in the family, they're not exposed to anything. They're exposed to an exposed person.
That's how people get COVID, is being exposed to somebody else who's exposed, right? So I don't understand the reasoning. Why aren't you quarantining the whole family?
Well, I can certainly pose that question to VDH. It's not in their guidelines, so we don't quarantine outside of their guidelines. They also have invited the board to a phone consult, which they have posed to all school divisions in the region. So those questions I leave to them as the medical professionals as to why they differentiate between one and not the other.
I'm curious, where is it really transmitting? Is it transmitting in the athletes? Is it transmitting in the cafeteria? Is it transmitting at home? So we're quarantining a lot of kids, maybe unnecessarily. That's my concern.
It's a good question, but I don't think we're able to discern where it's transmitting. Our work is limited to where the exposures or the close contacts possibly are to keep it from transmitting, or that's the intention, obviously, from VDH. But I don't know if we can discern where something is actually transmitted.
That is certainly beyond my capacity.
Yes, ma'am. It's amazing to me how the VDH and CDC has gotten into the education business.
Well, so the final notification is to VDH. We are required to notify VDH of every single positive case that is reported to us and provide them a line list of close contacts that we have identified within the school setting. And so they receive all of that information. I assume that as medical professionals, that is one of the reasons why they take that information, is to try to find overlap outbreaks. If this positive case with these 5 students that were exposed then develops into another positive case. And that's how they determine outbreaks in various settings.
It seems a little fragmented, but go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. So those are the notifications that are required by the school division. Questions on notifications? Okay, questions on quarantining after exposure? So the second thing I wanted to talk about was quarantining when you are symptomatic. And this would be assuming there's been no exposure. So this is also one of those questions that's coming up every day. Per CDC and VDH guidelines, and there's an algorithm on the VDH website that is referenced in our reopening document. If you have a symptom of an infectious illness that overlaps with a symptom of COVID-19, then you are.
However, there are options for reducing that quarantine, just as there were if you were exposed. There are options for reducing that if you are symptomatic. I have listed out there the symptoms that are on our list, and actually, I was reading over this today. I did leave one off in my case today, and that is sore throat left off there. Those are the symptoms that, per the algorithm, have to be quarantined. So, 2 ways to reduce your 10-day symptom quarantine. One is to provide an alternate diagnosis of something that accounts for your symptoms.
The allergies, strep throat, flu, the common cold, whatever the case may be, including, if you have a chronic illness that is documented, providing that information to the schools that accounts for those symptoms, and you return on normal standard sickness protocols.
So let me just stop you right there. You say chronic illness that is documented. Documented how? Because I mean, it says in the CDC that, if this is not, something that you're, like, some people get headaches all the time. Some people, especially kids, they have, runny noses. I mean, I can see, being cautious about all of this, but we are in allergy season, and some of that is very difficult. You sneeze and you got to go home. That's
Well, sneezing is not a
It'd be a
symptom.
sad day when people send their kids to school and say, don't tell anybody you don't feel well.
well, I think that's already happening.
Yeah.
The second option for reducing I'm
You
sorry,
didn't answer my question.
what was your question?
I said, what do you do? I mean, it's, if it's a chronic, how do you document that it's a chronic-ish, medical condition? If you have kids that have a really bad allergy, how does that have to be, how are we documenting that? Do we just have a note? Can we just have the parents turn in a note and say, hey, my son is suffering from, seasonal allergies right now, so he's going to have watery eyes and runny nose and possibly sneezing and coughing?
Well, documented by a physician, not by a
Well, that needs to be
parent.
clarified very well, because I think a lot of our kids are being sent home because they have a runny nose or they have a headache. And, a lot of kids I have a headache every day. I mean, this is.
Ms. Panzera, don't attack her.
I'm not attacking her. It's just, this is an area that we have a lot of complaints about, and it's something that has to be, documented. And she's saying a lot of, I don't know the answer. I have to check. So I don't think that's.
I'm
I
sorry.
don't agree with that.
I'm happy to go back to any questions that you have that I am able to answer. I'm not a doctor. I'm not a physician. I don't know why VDH has developed the guidelines the way they have. I can tell you that all of our guidelines are from the VDH. I don't create these. Our school division doesn't create these.
So does VDH say you have to have a doctor's note?
The VDH says you have to have documentation of an alternate diagnosis or a negative COVID test. So documentation of an alternate diagnosis. A diagnosis comes from a physician. And so documentation is.
So that has to be from a physician?
We also have, for students that are on medical plans, already have individualized health plans. We already have those documentation on file through whether it's their health plan. Some of our students, 504 IEP plans, do have these things already documented, historically. So we use those as well as a reference. In addition, as I was saying, a negative test for COVID-19 returns a student to school following the regular symptom timelines. But if neither of these alternate diagnoses or a negative test are able to be provided, then the quarantine remains at 10 days. And that's for students and staff. All of this information is provided to the families on the 6 student notification, on their symptoms calendar. It is communicated to them that an alternate diagnosis is through a physician. So although I briefly bulleted points here, that is in our communications to our families.
So, Ms. Fisher, this is not directed towards you, but so what's been very problematic is that parents, have to make a living. And if somebody's out for 14 days, that's one of the parents will have to be home. So it's causing a domino effect on things. And so there has to be a different way than what's going on now.
So I know I'm not alone in this. I did pose this question to VDH last week in regards to symptoms and just asking for, now that we are in school and they have real data for the first couple of weeks, will they revisit this as we head into allergy season and those sorts of things? And I would imagine that as we do meet weekly and engage us in these conversations, that other schools will do the same. And we may receive updated guidance. As you know, we're in like version 9 of our return calendars because they are being changed frequently. And so as those conversations are had and as they make changes to their guidelines, certainly we would follow suit.
I think that's important. And the Tuesday meetings that Mary's talking about, we ask very difficult questions of them. I mean, the very same questions you all are receiving, I'm receiving by email, we turn and ask the very same questions. Now, they are our partner and we work cooperatively with them and we understand, but I can tell you this morning, I gave feedback that I thought was important to give, and it's along the very same lines of what what we're all receiving. So I want to make it clear that we're not, we're responsible and we need to do the right thing in terms of following the guidance, but we are not just dogmatically following that. When we find that there's something that could be adjusted or that we think the application type input would be of value to VDH, we offer it freely. When I say we, I'm talking about myself, Dr. Baker, Cross and Spotsylvania, Dr. Calveric. We are all in those meetings and we're offering our perspective along with Ms. Fisher and her job likes in those divisions to try to help this process. And I think they in turn forward that input to their state level folks who ultimately decide upon these things. But I want to make that clear publicly. I think that that's important to understand is that yes, we're responsible for implementing these guidelines, but we also don't just do it without questioning at times or providing inputs or suggested improvements we think could be reasonable in scope for them to consider.
Well, how about Ms. Gonzalez? How about the federal government? You're a supervisor. Are they that deep into it where they're meeting with y'all all the time on these calls? Tell you what you.
So
no, we do not have.
I'm asking her.
Oh, I'm sorry.
no, so I can't speak to that. All I can say is that Ms. Fisher's presentation of this and the quarantine and the symptoms in the process and the close context of a close contact and how that all applies is all the same. So I recognize that this is a standard way of handling the quarantine protocol and processes in my experience.
Questions about students' symptoms in school? Okay. So we are collecting a lot of data and we do provide a lot of this data to VDH as well. Hopefully, again, to educate them and help inform future decisions and how this is impacting our school communities. As you know, on the dashboard each week, we are providing information on the number of positive cases, the number of exposures in school, and the number of exposures outside of school for both students and staff separately at each building, as well as the division total, since we have a handful of employees that don't fall into a particular building. The counts, a couple of notes to make, the counts are unduplicated. So because quarantine typically falls over more than 1 week, we would not count a quarantine in both weeks. We count them in the week that they begin their quarantine. The data does fluctuate retroactively. As you know, last week, our numbers were very small when they were posted on Monday, but as tests continue to come in and the
that number as it's posted this morning did increase, and it will continue to update that.
So you got 7 employees of the last week out. That's what she said.
Go to the next slide.
So right now we're having a sub shortage and teacher shortage. So how many teachers can there be out or staff out until it becomes a crisis? Or is it a crisis now?
No, I want to clarify the 7, I believe, those are staff members, not just teachers, correct?
Correct.
That's right. So, we may have monitors on buses or your point's a good one, is that certainly when we're down a staff member, there's a hole somewhere that needs to be filled or accommodated for. I don't know, your second question is one that I think, thus far, we've been fortunate enough to mitigate with subs that we have on hand or coverage that that we've provided within the school. So I don't know of a threshold necessarily where, I don't know if you're going to where we would need to shut down a school. I don't know if that's where you're going or wondering. But I think as of now, provided we continue as we've started, my hope would be that number would not escalate to the point where we would need to have widespread closures due to lack of staff. Certainly in the case of like bus staff, if we were to experience, you know, 3 or 4 driver outage there, then we'd have to double up runs. So there would be impact to our daily service. But again, as I said to start, you know, our goal is to keep everybody in school 5 days a week full time as the law requires. So any potential curtailment of instructional activity would be very limited or need to be very targeted to a group of at-risk students, is the way the state has put it, made it very clear to us.
So so all these people are getting exhausted. You know, I go to Food Line and staff tell me how exhausting all this is. Sooner or later, there's going to be some breaking point. People leaving, all that kind of stuff. I'm not asking you to address that. I'm just giving you the comments that have been raised to me.
Yeah, I'm not looking to address it, but I can tell you that we are certainly exhausted, but we are inspired in that we have kids in school. I started this by saying last year this time we did not have kids in school, but we have kids in school. We are doing what we feel we're morally obligated to do, and that's to have kids in school, and teaching and learning is going on. No doubt it has been an extremely stressful couple of weeks, but we have persevered, and we will continue to persevere and continue to host school for the students that we serve, doing whatever it takes. And that's just kind of what we do. And yep, we kind of have to pick each other up every now and then when we're at wit's end. I'll be totally frank with you. And there are many nights when we are picking each other up lately, but we will continue to do this. And I do take hope, and you know, Mary and I have talked about this quite a bit, that a lot of what we've been doing in terms of close contact exposures should diminish, you know, if our logic model holds up in terms of reduced numbers of close contacts. That in turn should diminish the number of quarantines. You know, there are factors. If a student is eligible to be vaccinated, we strongly encourage that, because again, students who are vaccinated are less at risk of quarantine, and then they are less impacted by any disruption to their education. So regardless of any efficacy or any you know, opinions in that way, you know, our goal is to keep kids in school. And if that means that you know, we wear masks, that keeps more kids in school, that's what we do. You know, feelings about whether masks are effective or not, quite frankly, you know, that's a second issue. The first issue is wanting to keep students eligible for those exceptions and keep them in school, which means then they should be wearing masks and wearing them appropriately so that we can keep kids in school. So that's a 25-cent response to your answer. I certainly agree with you, Mr. Collins, and I'm pretty sure, you know, most, if not all of our staff would agree with the premise that it is challenging in this environment, but nonetheless, we have school to conduct, we have kids to teach, we have families to serve, and we continue to do so to the very best of our ability. And I'm proud to stand with the staff that's doing this. They are going way above and beyond, I promise you.
That was the 25-cent answer. I can't wait for the dollar.
Before I turn it back over to Dr. Benson for the instructional piece, are there any more questions regarding anything I talked about tonight, or other questions that have come your way that maybe I didn't address that I can help clarify?
No, anyone?
Is there a way that we can tell what student positives are due to school exposure?
On the chart or in our own data?
Well, if you have it in your own data, then I would think you could put it on the chart, so we could start there.
So
I don't think so. I think that's the very same question as the transmission question, that I don't know that we're able to determine where, if I'm understanding correctly, where a student then was exposed and ultimately then contracted the disease. Is that what your question is? Where did they contract it?
Yeah, so Stafford has on theirs, last week they had 76 positive cases, but they're only reporting 3 number of students positive from school exposure. 76 number of student positives, number of students quarantined, and the number of students positive from school exposure was only 3. So 3 out of 76 it's very interesting. I mean,
Yeah. Hopewell's doing the same
I'd be
thing.
interested to know, not really accurate, but how they came up with that. And then if they do, if that is accurate, then what is ours? Because that would give us a good reading of what exposure and is happening.
So we could certainly reach out to Stafford and find out what criteria they're using to determine that. As I had stated in one of the previous slides, when we provide this information to VDH, if they were to find an overlap through their own process that they determine to be an outbreak, that is based on the epidemiology link between a student that is a student or a staff member exposed and then testing positive. That's a determination that they would make based on the line lists and then notify us of that outbreak. I don't know that that's how Stafford is counting it. I will certainly reach out to them tomorrow and ask, but that's the only indicator I know of where students are or staff are identified as being linked together is through their process, the VDH process.
So how about students that are positive that are over 12 that's been vaccinated? There's no way to find that out. Breakthrough, as they call them.
We do not necessarily, when a student tests positive, it is not part of our case investigation, nor are we privy to whether or not they are vaccinated, because it doesn't involve their positive test. We do ask for vaccination records for students that are exposed because that's part of the procedure. And although they don't have to provide that to us, certainly there's reason for them to, because if they don't, they can't return under the exception. But for a positive case, we wouldn't have that information because it's not part of what under HIPAA and FERPA we have access to in that situation, if that makes sense.
But you have access to the contact in that situation, to their health record, their immunization for COVID or not.
Correct.
But you don't, if they're positive, you don't have access to that.
Correct.
That doesn't seem to make sense.
So I think what does make sense about it is it doesn't actually affect this from a quarantine perspective. It's not going to matter because they've tested positive, and you don't want to like let them come back to school just because they were vaccinated if they were positive, right? So it's a piece of information that maybe you could gather but wouldn't need to for this process. And then I would argue that then doing that is kind of like us engaging upon our own like epidemiology study as to what our breakthrough cases.
Well, you want to be able to limit exposure in schools. So if they've been vaccinated and they're a positive, you want to be able to get that data so you can have less opportunity for other students to have that same type of breakthrough. That's why.
How is finding out if a positive student is vaccinated how is that going to prevent other students from getting? The only way you prevent other students from contacting it is by keeping the positive individual home, regardless of whether or not they're vaccinated.
And again, that's information that VDH has and has access to, and in their process and procedure of contact tracing that they would take into consideration when determining whether there are breakthrough cases or a breakthrough outbreak in King George or in a particular school, et cetera. But in terms of what we do as a school division and what's required of us and what we are legally permitted access to, that is not it. We are not permitted access to vaccination records for a student that tests positive because it's not involved in the process for a positive student in the school setting.
Well, I'm surprised you can have a vaccine. You can have the vaccine records for someone who's in close contact.
We ask for that because it's part of the process. We just don't have access to it generically. We ask for that information from the family because it's required to move forward in that process of whether to return them or continue them in school because they meet a vaccination exception, or to whether they have to quarantine or not. But it's optional on the parents' part on whether to provide that to us or not.
So you, how long have you been in this position?
Which position, COVID or?
Over at central office.
I believe this is year 7, maybe?
7. But you've been spending the last 2 years being the COVID chief.
Correct.
So all those other duties and responsibilities of student wellness and health are probably suffering. Not saying that you're not doing a good job. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that now we have someone that's, you know.
Are you suggesting
Okay,
she
Mr.
might need an assistant? I think that's a great idea.
I think everybody over there needs an assistant. I've already told you all that year after year, but so what I'm saying is I'm saying that, so we worry about all this stuff, but there's a whole nother line that everyone speaks of about kids' mental health situations and all these, what do they call them now, Gail?
Counselors.
They call them guidance counselor. What do they call them? Counselors? What do they call them?
Counselors.
School counselors. And so they're busy doing all these other things with COVID instead of their other activities, along with other.
So
They're
Make a
doing
statement.
all of the above activities. If I know school counselors and social workers and nurses, every single one of them are working far more hours than we pay them and with far more dedication than we can imagine at this point in time. I'm glad to have retired, Mrs. Fisher, and I'm wishing you all the energy in the world.
Ms. Fisher, thank you for your work, because I know on this COVID thing that you've done an outstanding job. And I know it's extremely stressful. And I know that you've been up late night hours. That's what your husband told me. And so I appreciate it. I'm not by any way saying you're doing a great job.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And as Dr. Benson said earlier, we all are. And as you run into people in the grocery store, everyone's exhausted, but we keep doing it.
That's why sometimes I go to Fredericksburg to shop because I can't make it through Food Lion.
Anything else for me?
thank you very much, Ms. Fisher. All right, Dr. Benson, did you have another?
Yeah, I just wanted to mention that we're, we spoke last week as far as, providing an update. And I just wanted to share that tomorrow morning, we scheduled a meeting for tomorrow morning before this, I knew about this update. But right now, as far as our high school and middle school, when students are, and again, we hope to reduce the number of quarantines, but when students had needed to, you can go back, John, to that previous one, have needed to quarantine. I know right now the work is assembled and is accessible in many cases at the secondary level. They're utilizing Canvas, which we used last year to deliver those assignments when possible or practical. If a family needs to pick up hard copies, we certainly accommodate them in that respect as well. We are looking, I'll add that at the high school, I know Dr. Boyd and I talked, and depending on the nature of the class, perhaps not in some of the classes where the students may be moving about in the classroom more so along with the instructor, but in some of the classes, they are able to utilize or at least kind of park a laptop and give a live but static, admittedly static view of the classroom should the student want to join as far as Google Meet. It's in no way what we offered last year because of course the teacher is teaching a live classroom. We are discussing ways that we could enhance at all levels. The elementary level, currently we're in the same mode as far as providing customized packets for students who may be out of school for a temporary period of time. We do either have families pick those up or we're happy to deliver them to their homes. But we are meeting tomorrow. We're looking to try to enhance the current level of service to see if there's a way that we could schedule time or a way students could access teacher help. Of course, it would be after the school day because our teachers are teaching during the school day their classes, but if there's a way to set that up. And I don't want to promise too much in particular. I'm just trying to be transparent that, we are looking at this critically tomorrow morning. We're happy to then come back in a couple of weeks and update you with what ultimately we believe we could do to facilitate a little bit more robust menu of options for continuing instruction for students who regrettably have to be quarantined But I wanted to speak to that we are doing our best to continue learning. We recognize that there may be opportunities we have to utilize technology in some cases, even pull the hotspots from the hotspots out of retirement to put them to use as well to try to augment what we are currently offering for students as far as continued learning. But I'll leave it at that with another thank you to Ms. Fisher, to all the staff. As we continue to navigate, we continue to learn, we continue to improve the ways that we're trying to minimize any necessary quarantines in school so that, again, ultimately we can keep our kids in school full-time learning 5 days a week. That's what we're after. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Dr. Benson. Any final comments or questions from the board? Okay, if not, we can move on to our final discussion item for the evening. And that was generating our vacancy interview questions for our potential interviews coming up on Tuesday, September 7th. So hopefully everyone gave some thought as to questions that they would like to put forth for our interview.
We're not going to discuss them openly and let everybody know what our questions are we? Is that your intent?
Well, I'm not sure why we can't.
Because what if somebody's not listening and somebody,
So this is a publicly recorded meeting. It's all publicly available information. And I would venture that if someone were interested in applying for said position, that they might be doing their homework.
So how many questions? 5?
I don't agree with announcing what all the questions are.
Yeah, I don't have a problem with it.
We already heard Mr. Collins' question. I remember what it was.
Mine's the easy question.
Yeah. Ms. Hawk, do you have a preference?
I understand Ms. Pancier's concern. I also think that these are such probably basic questions that it's not going to be a greatly added advantage if they know them or not. Having said that, we certainly can provide the interviewees with a set of the questions ahead of time, since we are discussing them in public.
So how many questions?
So we could, if we wanted to do 4 questions, that would be 1 question per board member. That would be an easy way to adjudicate it.
4 is good.
5 is good with me. If anyone has questions they would like to share, we can add them to a list to see how many questions we have.
You already know my question.
All right, so Mr. Collins' question is, why do you want to be on the school board, correct?
Yes.
All right, I'll add my question. Mine is, what is your past or current affiliation and experience with King George County Public Schools or the public schools or of another locality or state?
That's a big question.
It's not really.
I like, what's your experience?
Yep, pretty much. Anyone else?
How about we could field this question out, like what value do you bring aboard?
That's a good one.
How about how do you handle conflict in a
public
setting? So we've really had difficulties with that.
How do you handle conflict in a public group setting? Does that capture it? All right, we're up to 4. Ms. Hawk?
I think we might question, I'm trying to think of how to phrase this. Who or what does the person think they're representing?
So if they're a Republican or a Democrat?
No. Who are they representing? Are they representing the community or their district or a student or a family or?
Well, I would hope they would be representing their district. I mean.
So what is your vested interest?
Well, I don't know.
We all have a vested interest when we,
What is someone's vested interest? It should always be the same thing.
But it might not.
To represent, okay, you can ask it. whether they're a Republican or a Democrat.
So what is your vested interest in?
No, that wasn't my phrase. Who
Okay,
do they think they represent?
as a school board member, who do you?
Who do you represent?
Okay.
If any of them say anything other than the James Madison district would be a bad answer.
They certainly could represent individual students. They could represent families. They could.
Okay, so we can, yep, we can ask the question and we can see what the answers are.
That's right.
All right. Well, I don't have any additional questions. I think those captured mine. That's 5. Anyone else?
Say what the questions are.
Okay. Okay. So why do you want to be on the school board? What is your past or current affiliation and experience with King George County Public Schools or the public schools of another locality or state? What value do you bring to the board? How do you handle conflict in a public group setting? And as a school board member, who do you represent?
I think that's sufficient.
I think those are pretty good. Okay. Any additions or further discussion? All right. Unless there are objections, we'll move on to our committee reports.
Madam Chair, can I just get a clarification?
certainly.
Ms. Bushrod asked me today, as she receives applications, are those to be sent to the board members all at once, or are they to be, as we receive them, sent to board members?
I think the vacancy checklist said as we receive them.
Okay, so I'll have her turn those around to you all.
Okay.
Okay, and I assume you want, if a applicant were to contact us, they're not to contact you directly as board members. They're to submit the application to Ms. Bushrod.
Correct. Mhm. Okay, anything else?
So on the applicants, you're not doing any background interviews, right?
What do you mean, like us on the side interviewing people?
You three?
No, are you?
Nope.
Me three what?
So make sure it's clear.
Background
Like,
interview?
they come over to your house, have dinner, and you talk to them?
Oh, no.
No. Okay. All right, so moving on, committee reports. Ms. Pansiero, do you have any committee reports this evening?
No, I'm kind of curious as to when the committees are going to start. I haven't gotten any information. Dr. Benson, do you know
Sorry, I didn't.
when the committees are going to start?
I will check. Is there your committees in particular or just in general?
CTE committee?
Okay.
All right, Ms. Hawk.
I have a committee meeting tomorrow afternoon on which I will report back next meeting.
All right, very good. Mr. Collins?
None.
All right, and I don't have any reports, although I did receive an email from Ms. Half, our new director of technology, and stating that she was finalizing the list of per committee members and was going to be presenting that to us. So I look forward to that one kicking back off. So, all right, Dr. Benson, do you have any additional superintendent's report for us this evening?
No, I think you've gotten my
Covered it. All right, so we will move on to our board comment for the evening. Ms. Pansiero?
I have none.
Okay, Ms. Hawk?
Yes, I have a few words. And I'd first like to begin with an apology to Mr. Collins for interrupting you earlier. I want to say thank you especially to our sheriff, Chris Giles, and his entire staff. The DARE program has been in operation for a long time in this county. I think we're in the very early stages of the DARE program in Virginia, and our sheriff's department has supported it very, very well and very positively. So I really appreciate all the extra time that goes into that, that the deputies and the staff put in. I want to ask a question, Dr. Benson. I was in a CPR class today with Ms. Tate and Ms. Cameron, and we were talking about the use of AEDs. And could you check to see if there are AEDs on the second floors of Sealston Middle School and High School? There are? Okay, thank you. That took care of it. And thirdly, we are entering the school year and have managed to get through 2 quirky weeks. And we are going to be facing some typical problems. See, the calendar is set, and usually in September, we seem to run into whatever we call them, snow days or hurricane days, etc. And I do want to make sure that you have the appropriate attire, Dr. Benson. And so this is just to help you be prepared. Yes, please. Dr. Snow Grinch.
No, Grinch.
Well, thank you very much.
If you recall earlier when we were discussing the use of virtual school, that perhaps we would be eliminating snow days or hurricane days or that kind of thing. So you're adequately dressed now.
All right.
Thank you, but I'll say that I think those that know me best know that I celebrate a good snow day just like anybody else.
All right. Thank you, Ms. Hawk. Mr. Collins?
So I'll keep mine brief, and mine are, so I've made this comment earlier today, earlier this meeting, but it befuddles me how the Virginia Department of Health and the CDC have gotten so ingrained into the education business of when kids can go to school and when they can't. I think that government control is getting tighter and tighter, and I think we need to stand up for ourselves. And that's the end of my comment.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Collins. So I just want to say thank you, Dr. Benson, for having Dr. Gaston come this evening and share with us the plans for putting together a strategic planning initiative. I'm super excited about that. I look forward to meeting with him. So anyway, I think that's a sign of good things to come. So thank you for that. And other than that, thank you, Ms. Fisher, for being here with us this evening, answering hard questions as always. So your contributions, as well as all the other staff, is most certainly appreciated. And that's all I have. Do we have a motion to go into closed session?
I'll make a motion to go into closed session pursuant to State Code Section 2.2-3711.A.1 for the purpose of discussion, consideration, of prospective candidates for employment, assignment, substitutes, stipends, and resignations of employees of the school board.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Chair votes aye. We're now in closed session. Turn to open session.
I move that the King George County School Board return to open session and certify that pursuant to State Code 2.2-3712.d, only public business matters lawfully exempted from open meeting requirements under this chapter, and only such public business matters as were identified in the motion by which the closed meeting was convened were heard, discussed, or considered in the meeting by the public body.
Second and certified.
Certify.
Certify. All in favor?
Aye.
Chair votes aye. We're now in open session. Do we have a motion to approve the action from closed session?
A motion to approve the personnel as presented.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Chair votes aye.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
We are now adjourned.